Hello. Welcome to Sleepy Old World. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found your way. Pull the blanket up a little closer, find that comfortable position you always find eventually, and just let yourself settle for a moment. Tonight we are going somewhere wonderful. Somewhere warm and carpeted and lit from above in a particular way that people who experienced it still remember decades later. In that specific, involuntary way that sensory memory works. Where you do not so much think of a place as suddenly find yourself standing inside it again. Here is the thing that stops me every time I come across it. At the peak of the American department store era, in the middle of the 1950s, some of the largest stores employed more staff than small towns had residents. Marshall Field's in Chicago, for example, had at one point over 13,000 people working across its various departments. Support staff, buyers, floor workers, seamstresses, elevator operators, and gift wrappers. 13,000. The store was, in the most literal possible sense, its own small city. I always want to know where you are when you listen. What does the room look like right now? Is it raining outside, or quiet, or that particular deep dark that only happens at a certain hour? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely want to picture it. I want to know what part of the world is going to sleep tonight alongside this story. I want you to picture this. It is the autumn of 1953. The morning is cool and clear, that particular October clarity that makes everything look slightly more precise than usual. The edges of buildings a little sharper, the colours of women's coats more saturated against the pale sky. You're standing on a wide downtown street in any one of a dozen American cities, and in front of you is a building that takes up the entire block. Maybe it is 6 stories, maybe 8. The windows are enormous, framed in polished bronze that catches the light and throws it back at you, and inside each window is a scene, arranged with the same care a painter would bring to a canvas. A woman in a red wool coat stands beside a table set with autumn leaves and china. A child in a velvet dress holds a small bouquet of silk flowers. A living room in miniature, upholstered in tones of gold and brown. A fire painted on the backdrop behind it, looking so warm you might actually expect to feel the heat. This is the department store, and you're about to go inside. The door's heavy glass set in a revolving frame that moves with a gentle push, and the moment you step through it, the world rearranges itself. The street noise falls away. The cool air is replaced by something carefully managed, not quite warm, not quite cool, a temperature that seems to have been selected the way you might select a background for a photograph, a temperature that simply does not draw attention to itself. And the smell. This is the thing that people who lived through this era talk about, the smell of a department store in the 1950s, a combination of perfume from the cosmetics counters just inside the entrance, the slight chemical sweetness of new fabric, the faint trace of floor wax on marble, and underneath it all, something harder to name, something that had to do with newness and possibility, with the particular pleasure of being somewhere that had been designed to make you feel that the world was full of beautiful objects and that some of them might be yours. Let us stay with this for a moment, because the smell matters. The cosmetics counters were always positioned near the entrance. This was not an accident. It was deliberate, carefully calculated, the result of decades of retail thinking that understood something important about how human beings move through space. You put the most fragrant, most colourful, most immediately appealing things right at the door, so that every woman who walked in was met in the first 10 seconds with glass cases full of lipstick in every shade from coral to deep burgundy, with bottles of perfume arranged on mirrored shelves, with powder compacts that caught the light and threw it back in small bright sparks. The counters were low, and the saleswomen stood behind them in their dark uniforms, with their hair pinned neatly and their own lipstick immaculate. And there was an implied invitation in the whole arrangement. Not a pressure exactly, something softer than that, an offering. The woman coming in from the street in 1953 would have felt this immediately, even if she had no intention of buying perfume that day. The store wanted you to feel that you had stepped into a different world, and the cosmetics counter was the threshold between one world and the other. Behind you was the ordinary street, the car horns, the dry cleaner, the drugstore, the grocery with its practical brown paper bags. Ahead of you was this, and this was different. Let us call her Dorothy. She's 34 years old, and she's lived in this city her whole life. She knows this store the way you know a place you've been coming to since childhood, not just as a building, but as a series of sensations, a map of memories. She knows which elevator operator is likely to be working on a Tuesday morning. She knows that the ladies' lounge on the 4th floor has a settee upholstered in pale green, and that you can sit there and rest your feet for as long as you like, without anyone making you feel that you ought to be shopping. She knows that the china department on the 6th floor smells slightly of wood from the shelving, and that the lighting up there is gentler than anywhere else in the building, and that if you stand near the window you can see the whole length of the street below. She has her good coat on today. This is not an insignificant detail. In 1953, women wore specific things to go downtown, to go to the department store, and what you wore was a decision made before you left the house, a conscious one. Because the department store was not a casual errand in the way that running to the grocery for butter was a casual errand. Going to the department store was an occasion, not a grand occasion necessarily, not the way a dinner party was, but an occasion nonetheless. You dressed for it, you put on your hat, you wore your good gloves. Dorothy's coat is charcoal grey wool, with a large collar that buttons high against the neck. It is not new, but it is well maintained, the nap still smooth, the buttons still tightly attached. She bought it 2 autumns ago, here, in this very store, in the women's coat department on the 3rd floor, and she remembers the saleswoman who helped her, a tall woman with a slight southern accent, who held each coat open with practised ease and said very little, only the occasional soft comment. That one is lovely on you. This one perhaps more practical. She was not pushy. That was one of the things Dorothy appreciated most about the better department stores in this era. The saleswomen who understood the difference between helping and pressuring, who read the situation correctly, and simply made themselves available rather than hovering. The woman coming in from the street in 1953 would have felt this immediately even if she had no intention of buying perfume that day. The store wanted you to feel that you had stepped into a different world, and the cosmetics counter was the threshold between one world and the other. Behind you was the ordinary street, the car horns, the dry cleaner, the drugstore, the grocery with its practical brown paper bags. Ahead of you was this, and this was different. Let us call her Dorothy. She is 34 years old, and she has lived in this city her whole life. She knows this store the way you know a place you have been coming to since childhood, not just as a building but as a series of sensations, a map of memories. She knows which elevator operator is likely to be working on a Tuesday morning. She knows that the ladies' lounge on the 4th floor has a settee upholstered in pale green, and that you can sit there and rest your feet for as long as you like without anyone making you feel that you ought to be shopping. She knows that the china department on the 6th floor smells slightly of wood from the shelving, and that the lighting up there is gentler than anywhere else in the building, and that if you stand near the window you can see the whole length of the street below. She has her good coat on today. This is not an insignificant detail. In 1953, women wore specific things to go downtown, to go to the department store, and what you wore was a decision made before you left the house, a conscious one, because the department store was not a casual errand in the way that running to the grocery for butter was a casual errand. Going to the department store was an occasion, not a grand occasion necessarily, not the way a dinner party was, but an occasion nonetheless. You dressed for it. You put on your hat. You wore your good gloves. Dorothy's coat is charcoal grey wool with a large collar that buttons high against the neck. It is not new, but it is well maintained, the nap still smooth, the buttons still tightly attached. She bought it 2 autumns ago here, in this very store, in the women's coat department on the 3rd floor, and she remembers the saleswoman who helped her, a tall woman with a slight southern accent who held each coat open with practiced ease and said very little, only the occasional soft comment, "That one is lovely on you. This one perhaps more practical." She was not pushy. That was one of the things Dorothy appreciated most about the better department stores in this era. The saleswomen who understood the difference between helping and pressuring, who read the situation correctly and simply made themselves available rather than hovering. The hat is navy blue with a small brim and a twist of fabric at one side. The gloves are white cotton, recently washed. She is carrying a handbag, medium-sized, black leather, with a brass clasp that closes with a satisfying click. Inside the handbag there is a folded list, written in blue ink on the back of an envelope. There is also a small coin purse, a compact, a lipstick in a shade called Cherries in the Snow, and a monogrammed handkerchief that belonged to her mother. She is not here today for any dramatic purpose. There is no birthday coming up, no special occasion that requires an expensive gift. She needs a new set of dish towels for the kitchen, because 3 of hers have frayed past the point of dignity. She wants to look at the winter nightgowns because the temperature has dropped and her current ones are not quite warm enough. And she wants to browse, which in 1953 was its own legitimate activity, not a euphemism for anything else, just the genuine pleasure of moving through the store without pressure, looking at things, touching fabrics, trying a little of the perfume they offer on small squares of paper, watching other women, being in the particular atmosphere of the place. Browsing was understood as what you did at the department store. It was part of the contract. She moves through the cosmetics counter without stopping today. She stops on the way out, sometimes, if she is feeling indulgent. On the way in, she moves with purpose, making her way toward the elevator bank at the center of the floor, the elevators. Now here is a detail that tends to stop people who have never heard it before. The elevators in major department stores in the 1950s were operated by human beings, not buttons, not the quiet automation that we are so accustomed to now, where you press a number and the doors close and something invisible takes you there. Elevator operators. They stood in the elevator all day in their uniforms, and they called the floors as you arrived at them. 3rd floor, ladies ready to wear, millinery and lingerie. 4th floor, housewares, furniture and the ladies' lounge. 5th floor, children's clothing and toys. They knew the floor layouts better than most of the saleswomen did. They could tell you exactly where the restrooms were, which department had moved since the last season, where the tea room was, whether it was currently busy. A good elevator operator was a resource, a quiet and reliable one. The operator in Dorothy's elevator today is a woman of about 50 with grey hair and a manner that is warm without being familiar. The elevator is small, panelled in dark wood, with a brass indicator above the door that sweeps in a half circle as you rise. The floor numbers are etched into the brass. Dorothy watches it as they ascend. She finds something soothing about this, the mechanical clarity of it, the needle moving steadily from 1 to 2 to 3. She gets off on the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor, in this particular store, holds the better fabrics and notions department along one wall, and the section she is heading for, which in the store's own language is called domestics, a word that covers sheets and pillowcases and tablecloths and towels and everything that belongs, in the store's taxonomy, to the category of home and household. The aisle is wide, the linens are stacked on deep wooden shelves, folded with the kind of precision that requires practice, the corners aligned exactly, the items separated by type and color, in a way that makes the whole shelf look almost architectural. White dish towels, striped dish towels, printed cotton in small patterns, checks and small flowers, terry cloth in half a dozen colors. Dorothy touches the nearest stack. This is the other thing about the department store in this era, and it is a thing that no digital shopping experience has yet managed to replicate, which is that you touched everything. You were encouraged to touch everything. The whole point of being there in person was the tactile information. You could see a fabric's color in a photograph, or so they were beginning to discover in the new mail order catalogues, but you could not feel its weight or its smoothness, or the particular way a good terry cloth towel had a slight resistance at first, a small roughness that meant it would actually absorb water rather than sliding across a wet surface. You touched, you compared, you held two things side by side and made decisions based on information that no one could have given you from a description. Dorothy picks up a white cotton towel, holds it between her hands, tests the weight. Then she reaches for a slightly heavier one, cream-colored, with a narrow navy stripe at each end. She holds both, one in each hand, which she realizes must look slightly odd but does not care. She is weighing them. Not literally, not on a scale, but in her own private assessment. The cream one is nicer, she thinks, more substantial, but it will show tea stains against the cream ground, whereas the white one will at least be easy to bleach back to clean. She sets the cream one down, picks up the white one again. The saleswoman appears beside her with the quiet approach that good saleswomen in this era seem to have perfected. Present without startling, nearby without hovering. She is perhaps Dorothy's age, with dark hair waved away from her face and a name badge on her lapel that reads Jean. Those are very popular this season, Jean says, which is a thing saleswomen said about almost everything but which nevertheless manages to feel like useful information. Good weight, she adds. They hold up well. You can boil them. The information about boiling is significant. In 1953, the ability to boil your dish towels, to cook them in a pot of water with washing soda to restore their whiteness after staining, was a genuine selling point. Housewives boiled laundry. It was still standard practice in households that took their domestic standards seriously, and most of the women shopping in this department took their domestic standards very seriously. The idea that a fabric might not withstand boiling was a mark against it. Dorothy asks about the count, meaning the thread count, the density of the weave. Jean answers with the exact number, and also mentions that the mill that makes them has been supplying the store for 12 years, which Dorothy has no way of verifying but finds reassuring anyway. There is something about this transaction, the specificity of the information, the slight formality of the exchange, the way it is structured as a conversation between two women who both understand the subject and both take it seriously, that she finds satisfying in a way that is hard to articulate. She is not simply buying towels, she is participating in something that has its own language and its own protocols. She buys 4 of the white ones and 2 of a slightly smaller size for everyday use. Jean wraps them in white tissue paper and then in a flat box with the store's name embossed on the lid, even though Dorothy is going to use these to dry dishes and the box will be discarded the moment she gets home. The wrapping is not about the towels, it is about the experience of receiving something, the small ritual of the box and the tissue, the weight of the thing in its packaging, as opposed to just the thing itself. Dorothy has always liked this. Her daughter thinks she is silly for it. Her daughter is 12, which explains this. The box goes into the handled shopping bag that Jean produces, again with the store's name on it. A good heavy paper bag with rope handles that will be used again, brought back on the next shopping trip, until eventually the rope handle frays or the bottom weakens. Wasting a good shopping bag would not have occurred to Dorothy. It does not occur to most of the women around her either. She moves toward the elevator again, then changes her mind and takes the stairs instead. The stairs in a good department store were their own kind of pleasure. Wide, carpeted in a deep pattern with brass handrails worn smooth. You could see the floors open up as you descended, the ceiling of one floor giving way to the open space of the next, a brief aerial view of the life below before the floor rose to meet you. She is heading for the nightgown department, which is on the 3rd floor, tucked between ready-to-wear on one side and the lingerie department on the other. The nightgowns in the early 1950s were substantial. This is something that surprises people, who perhaps imagine the era as one of flimsy nylon and pastel lace. Some of that existed, but the winter nightgowns that a woman like Dorothy would shop for were a different matter. Heavy cotton flannel, brushed cotton in small prints, soft wool blends in a few of the higher-end lines, floor length, long-sleeved with high necklines and sometimes a bit of white cotton piping at the collar and cuffs. Practical and warm and, in their own particular way, rather beautiful. The way a thing can be beautiful when it is exactly what it is supposed to be and nothing else. Dorothy browses the rack slowly. The nightgowns hang on wooden hangers spaced evenly, each one in its size, arranged by style and then by color within each style. There is something meditative about moving along a rack like this, pulling each one slightly forward to see it better, letting it fall back. She is looking for something specific, though she could not quite have said what before she started looking. She will know it when she sees it. This is a truth about shopping that has probably never changed. She finds it in a deep teal blue, which the tag calls peacock, a name she finds slightly extravagant for a flannel nightgown, but which she appreciates the ambition of. The fabric is a brushed cotton with a slight nap, soft to the touch, with a small scattered pattern of white dots that are subtle enough not to feel busy. The collar is rounded and finished with a narrow white cuff. She holds it against herself in front of the narrow mirror at the end of the rack, tilting her head slightly. The saleswoman here is younger, perhaps 22, with an open face and a manner that is helpful without being practiced in the way Jean's was. She is newer to this. You can tell by the way she moves toward Dorothy a fraction too quickly, then checks herself. Dorothy smiles at her genuinely because she remembers being new to things. That is a very warm weight, the young woman says. Very popular for winter, Dorothy thinks. Everyone says everything is popular, but she does not say this. She says, "It is lovely," and then she asks about the care instructions, because she has had nightgowns before that seemed substantial on the rack, and then emerged from the washing machine the size of a handkerchief. Machine wash in cold water, the young woman says. Lay flat or hang dry for best results. Do not wring. Dorothy takes 2, one in the peacock blue and one in a pale grey that the tag calls Dove, which seems more like an accurate description than a name. She has learnt over the years to buy 2 of things she intends to use every day. 2 rotates into use while 1 is in the wash, and you never find yourself in the situation of being without. The 3rd floor is doing a steady business this morning. Dorothy notices as she carries her bag toward the central area near the elevator, the particular mix of women who populate a department store on a Tuesday in October. There are women about her age, women who are clearly on their lunch hour from office jobs nearby, still in their work clothes, moving quickly and purposefully. There are older women, perhaps in their 60s, who move more slowly, and seemed to be browsing in the way that Dorothy herself intended to browse today but found herself not quite doing. There is a young mother with a pram who has somehow managed to navigate the whole arrangement without disaster, and who is examining a wool coat for herself with one hand while keeping the other on the pram's handle. There are very few men, occasionally one standing slightly outside the flow of things, waiting for someone. The department store in this particular hour of this particular era was overwhelmingly a women's world. This is worth thinking about for a moment, because it is easy to overstate and easy to understate. The 1950s is an era that has been somewhat compressed in popular memory into a single image, and it is not always an accurate one. Women's lives in this decade were circumscribed in ways that were real and significant, and we should not pretend otherwise. But they were not simple, and the women living them were not passive. The department store was one of the spaces where this complexity showed up most clearly. Here was a public world that was designed specifically for women, staffed primarily by women, yes, though the managers and buyers and executives were often men, but the floor was women's territory, and women moved through it with the particular ease of people who know they belong somewhere. The sales floor was not a place where you had to justify your presence. You were expected. You were wanted. The whole enterprise had been built, literally and architecturally, with you in mind, and within this space, women made decisions, real ones, with money, with taste, with knowledge accumulated over years of shopping and managing households and understanding quality. A woman who had been buying linens for 15 years knew things about thread counts and weave structures and which mills produced work that held up to washing and which ones did not, that no catalogue description could convey. She brought expertise. The store, at its best, recognized this and staffed accordingly, hiring saleswomen who had knowledge and could meet her there. At its less than best, the store hired young women who said everything is very popular this season and hoped for the best. Both existed. Dorothy had encountered both over the years. She takes the elevator down to the main floor, pausing in the elevator for a moment of the gentle rocking sensation as the cab settles at the ground. The operator announces the floor with a formality that seems slightly ceremonial for what is, after all, just the ground level of a building, and Dorothy thanks her, which is not something everyone does, but which she has always done, because she cannot imagine not doing it. She is not quite ready to leave yet. She never is quite. There is a particular quality to the department store that made leaving it feel slightly abrupt, like leaving a film before the credits have quite finished. The transition back to the street, with its noise and its ordinary air, required a moment of preparation. She drifts toward the glove counter, which she has no intention of buying anything from, but which is simply pleasant to look at. The gloves in 1953 were another world entirely. White cotton for everyday, elbow-length kid leather for evening, short black ones for formal day wear, medium-length brown ones for driving. The variations were intricate, governed by rules that most women of this class understood instinctively, having absorbed them over years of dressing and observing how other women dressed. The gloves were laid out in the case under glass, each pair arranged with the fingers slightly curved, almost as if they were waiting for a hand to slip into them. The leather ones had a sheen. The cotton ones had a kind of crisp stillness. Dorothy leans against the counter and looks at a pair in pale grey suede that are simply, quietly beautiful. The kind of thing that exists at the intersection of usefulness and elegance, and that you want not because you need grey suede gloves, but because they seem to represent something about the world being a place where beautiful small things are made. She does not buy them. She thinks about them for a moment, turns the thought over, then sets it down. The perfume counter, on the way out. She slows here as she usually does. The saleswoman is occupied with another customer, which means Dorothy can linger at the edge of the counter without obligation, just looking. The bottles are extraordinary in this era. The 1950s were a golden age of perfume packaging, which is not something that gets said very often but is nonetheless true. The bottles were designed as objects, baccarat crystal for some of the French imports, thick and heavy with stoppers shaped like flowers or abstract forms. Simple geometric bottles in smoky glass for the American lines, small flattened ovals in frosted glass with embossed labels. Each one felt like something that deserved to be looked at independent of what was inside it. Dorothy's own perfume is Evening in Paris, the one in the deep blue bottle that her husband gave her for her birthday 3 years ago. She has used it so consistently for so long that she no longer notices when she is wearing it, only when she is not. But she likes to look at the other bottles, the French ones with their names that feel slightly theatrical. Le Bleu, Shalimar, Bandit, and imagine the women they might belong to. She picks up a small card from the counter, one of the perfume sample strips, and holds it for a moment without spraying anything onto it. Then she sets it down again and moves toward the door. The revolving door carries her through in a smooth quarter-circle revolution, and then she is outside. The air is colder than she remembered. The street has its usual mid-morning business, men in suits moving with intention, a delivery truck idling at the curb, 2 women standing in conversation outside the jeweler's 2 doors down. Dorothy shifts the shopping bag to her other hand. The bag is not heavy, but the rope handles are the sort that remind you they are there after a while, a slight pressure across the palm. She stands for a moment on the pavement outside the store, looks back up at the window display, the one with the woman in the red wool coat and the autumn leaves, which she can see now from outside, the illusion slightly broken by the daylight, the backdrop visible as what it is, painted fabric, the woman in the coat revealed as a dummy, and yet the thing still works. The window still draws the eye, still suggests a world that is put together and beautiful and slightly better than the one on the pavement. This is the genius of the window display, the thing that the great department store windows of this era understood and executed with such astonishing skill. She walks toward the bus stop. Now let me tell you a little more about the world Dorothy has just left, because there is so much in it that deserves attention, things that were happening inside those walls in the 1950s that most people who walked through the doors every day simply took for granted, not thinking about them the way you do not think about the systems that make an ordinary morning function. The department store of this era was an enormously complex organism. Its front of house, the floors you walked through, the displays you touched, the counters you leaned against, was the visible surface of something that went very deep and very wide. Behind the scenes in the stock rooms and loading docks and alteration rooms and offices, there were hundreds more people doing work that the customers never saw and probably never thought about. The stock room was a different world from the sales floor. If the sales floor was carpeted and lit with intention and arranged for beauty, the stockroom was bare concrete and fluorescent light and wire shelving stacked to the ceiling with cardboard boxes. The merchandise had to come in, be received, be checked against the purchase orders, be sorted by department and size and style, be tagged with the store's own price tags if it had not come pre-tagged, be logged into the inventory, and then be brought out to the floor in the right quantities, not too much at once, because too much created a cluttered look that the floor managers hated, and not too little because running out of sizes was a disaster of its own kind. There were people whose entire jobs were these things, stockroom clerks who moved between the back and the floor all day, carrying armloads of merchandise or pushing rolling racks of garments, receivers who stood at the loading dock in the early morning and checked in deliveries, inventory takers who counted and recorded with a thoroughness that the later age of computerized systems would recognize, but that was done here entirely on paper, with pen in ledgers. And then there was the tailor's room. Most large department stores in the 1950s had one. This was where alterations happened, where the dress you had bought off the rack was transformed into something that fit your body rather than the body of whoever the dress had been designed for. The women who worked in the alteration rooms were skilled, really skilled, in the way that requires years and a particular kind of patience and spatial intelligence, the ability to look at a garment on a body and understand in 3 dimensions what needs to happen to make it right. They pinned and chalked and cut and sewed and pressed. They did this all day. Some of them had been doing it for 20 or 30 years. This was, in its own way, one of the department store's great services to the women who shopped there. Ready-to-wear clothing of this era was not sized the way clothing is sized now, with the enormous range of sizes and fits that the modern market provides. In 1953, you bought in the size closest to yours, and then you had it altered. This was assumed. The alteration room was not a special service for the particular or the difficult. It was part of the purchase. The hem would be adjusted. The shoulders would be taken in if necessary. The waist could be let out or taken in. The sleeves could be shortened. The fitting was part of the system. Dorothy has had things altered there many times. The grey coat she is wearing today was shortened by 1.5 inches at the hem, and the lining was repressed where it had been pulling at the seams. She had a conversation with the alterations woman, a Hungarian immigrant named Mrs. Farkas, who had been there for 15 years and who had the most precise way of pinning hems that Dorothy had ever observed, as if the pins were going in exactly right the first time, every time, which they were. Mrs. Farkas rarely talked while she worked. This was something Dorothy had always respected about her. Most people, when they are doing something that requires concentration, talk anyway, and the talking and the working fight each other. Mrs. Farkas simply worked. Occasionally she would make a sound that was neither approval nor disapproval, just acknowledgement. And at the end, when she stood up from where she had been kneeling with her pincushion strapped to her wrist, she would say in her slightly formal English, "Come back Thursday." And when you came back Thursday, it would be exactly right. There was a whole world of people like Mrs. Farkas inside those buildings. The invisible workforce of the store, and their invisibility was itself a kind of art, because the whole point of the well-run department store was that the machinery did not show. The floor was always stocked. The merchandise was always neatly arranged. The wrapping was always fresh. The carpets were always clean. The mirrors were always clear. These things happened because of the people in the back, on the early shift, before the doors opened. But by the time Dorothy or any other customer arrived, there was nothing to suggest the work, only the effect. Let us go back to the floor for a moment, to that particular morning in October, because there is more to notice there. The millinery department was on the 3rd floor, near the coat section. Millinery, which is the formal word for hats, and in 1953 the hat department of a major store was still a substantial operation. Hats were not optional accessories in this decade. They were, for women who dressed with any attention to propriety, a requirement. You wore a hat to go downtown, you wore a hat to church, you wore a hat to a luncheon, you wore a hat to a funeral, you wore a hat to shop at a department store, which is the slightly circular fact that Dorothy, if she thought about it, would recognize. She has come to buy things that are worn, and she is wearing a hat in order to come and buy them. The hat department had its own particular smell, which was the smell of felt and straw and the light chemical scent of the formers that gave the hats their shape, and underneath all of that, the faint animal scent of the feathers that trimmed the better models. The hats sat on stands, each one like a small sculpture. Autumn hats this season were showing a lot of pheasant feather trimming, and some of the more dramatic models had veiling, a fold of black or navy net that dropped from the brim and stopped just below the cheekbones. The veiled hat. This was an item that read in photographs of the era as slightly theatrical, slightly mysterious, the kind of thing you imagine a woman in a film noir wearing, but which in practice was simply a hat that happened to have a veil, worn by ordinary women going about their ordinary Tuesday mornings. The hat saleswoman in this department was a woman who had the particular talent of looking at a customer and knowing almost immediately what shape of hat would suit them. This sounds like a small skill. It is not a small skill. The shape of a hat interacts with the shape of a face in ways that are not always predictable, and the wrong hat on the wrong head creates a result that is difficult to explain but immediately obvious. The right hat does the opposite. It looks like the woman has had it forever, like it arrived with her. The good hat saleswoman could find this for you in 2 or 3 tries, sometimes 1. Dorothy has bought 3 hats here. The navy one she is wearing today, and 2 others she cycles through depending on the season and the occasion. She does not go into the hat department this morning, only glances as she passes, noting a grey felt model with a small turned brim that she thinks she might come back and look at more carefully before the season runs out. She is going down to the ground floor, past the cosmetics, past a display of seasonal gift items that has appeared since last week, small glass ornaments and boxed candles, and a neat row of perfume gift sets with bows already attached, because the Christmas season is not so far away now that the store is not already beginning to accommodate it. Christmas preparation in the 1950s was an elaborate affair, and the department store was at the center of it, the place where the gifts were chosen and bought and wrapped and collected, where children were brought to see the decorated windows and sit on Santa's knee in the special Christmas section that appeared in early November, where women spent what felt like weeks moving from department to department with lists that needed to be checked off, but that is for later in the season. Today it is October. The Christmas displays are only just beginning to creep in at the edges, and Dorothy is simply here on a Tuesday morning with a list on the back of an envelope. She pushes through the revolving door and stands again on the pavement, and we stay with her for a moment, watching the city go on around her before we go back inside, because there is so much more to see. The department store in 1953 was not a single experience. It was a collection of small experiences nested inside one another, each department its own territory with its own atmosphere, its own staff, its own unspoken rules. If you spent a full day there going from department to department, eating lunch in the store's tier room, having your purchases sent down to the pickup desk and collected on your way out, you would have had by the end of it something that was not quite like any other kind of day. The tier room, for example. Let us spend a moment in the tier room. Most large department stores of this era had one, a proper one. Not a cafeteria, not a lunch counter, but a room. Sometimes on an upper floor with windows, sometimes in a lower level with a kitchen nearby and the sounds of it drifting pleasantly through the door. There were tablecloths, there were proper china cups. There was a menu handwritten on a card with items that had names rather than just descriptions, a chicken salad sandwich on white bread cut in triangles, a cream of tomato soup that was slightly sweet and deeply savory in a way that homemade versions rarely quite matched, lemon pound cake, small buttered rolls that came in a basket with a cloth napkin over them to keep them warm, tea in a pot with a cozy over it, served with a pitcher of warm milk and a small dish of sugar cubes. The tier room was almost exclusively populated by women. Women alone, women in pairs, women in groups of 3 or 4 who had been shopping together and were stopping to rest and reassemble their thoughts and plans. The noise level was moderate. a pleasant hum of conversation, with the occasional clink of china. The lighting was softer than on the sales floor. The chairs were padded. There were, in the better stores, small flowers on the tables, nothing grand, a few chrysanthemums in a bud vase, or in the right season, something with a stronger smell, roses or freesia. It was an environment designed for a certain kind of recovery from effort. You had been on your feet, carrying things, making decisions. Now you could sit. Now someone would bring you something. The tea room understood the rhythm of a shopping day in the way that only an institution deeply embedded in women's culture can understand something. It knew that you needed this middle pause. It had always known this. There was also a social aspect to the tea room that is worth understanding. In 1953, eating alone in a restaurant was not something a respectable woman did as a matter of course. There were places where a woman eating alone would attract attention, a kind of ambient, mild curiosity from other patrons, or worse, from staff, who might hover with an uncertain manner, not quite knowing whether she was waiting for someone or not. The department store tea room was one of the few places where a woman eating alone was entirely unremarkable. It was understood as normal, even commonplace. You were shopping, you needed lunch, you sat, no further explanation was required. This was a more significant freedom than it might initially appear. The freedom to occupy a public dining space alone, without the social cover of male accompaniment or the explanation of waiting for someone, was not something all spaces of this era offered. The tea room gave it freely, because the tea room understood who its customers were. Dorothy has eaten in the tea room many times. She knows to get there before 1 o'clock if she wants a table without a wait, because by 1 o'clock the lunch crowd from the surrounding offices has arrived and the room is full. She knows that the lemon pound cake is very good but very dense, and that she can never quite finish a slice, and that the waitress will always wrap the rest in a small piece of wax paper for her to take home without being asked. She knows that the table near the window that overlooks the street is very pleasant if the sun is not directly in it, and not pleasant at all if it is. All of this is the accumulated knowledge of a regular. She has earned it over years. The store also offered a service that seems almost impossibly civilized from a modern vantage point, and that is the service of having your purchases held or sent to a single location for collection. You could, in a large department store, spend an entire day shopping across every floor, hand your purchases to a staff member at the point of sale in each department, and have them all collected, wrapped, and waiting for you at a single desk on the ground floor when you were ready to leave. You did not carry your purchases through the store. You browsed, you chose, you paid, you moved on, and at the end the whole day's accumulation was waiting for you neatly arranged. The alternative, which some stores also offered, was delivery. You placed your order, gave your address, and the goods arrived at your home in a day or two. This sounds like an innovation of recent decades. It was standard practice in the department stores of this era, not for all purchases, but for large or heavy ones, for things that would not conveniently fit in a shopping bag, for the cases of 12 or the bolts of fabric or the set of china that required its own packing. The store had a delivery operation with vans and routes and a whole separate infrastructure, and this delivery was free or folded into the cost of the purchase in a way that did not feel like an extra charge. The charge account was another invention of this era that deserves more attention than it typically gets. In 1953, many middle-class women who shopped regularly at a department store did so on a charge account. You had an account with the store, you made your purchases and signed your name, and at the end of the month you received a statement and settled it. There was no interest if you paid promptly. There was no digital record, no algorithm tracking your buying patterns, no targeted advertising that followed you around based on what you had looked at. The charge account was also, and this is the interesting part, often in the woman's own name, or not. This depended on the household. In some cases the account was in the husband's name and the wife used it. In other cases, and this is more common than the popular image of the decade would suggest, the woman had her own account, in her own name, funded from the household allowance her husband provided, or from her own small earnings, and she managed it herself. The store did not particularly care whose name was on the account, as long as someone settled the bill at the end of the month. Dorothy has her own account. She has had it since she was 26 and first opened it, slightly nervously, at the account desk on the main floor, a moment she remembers with an odd clarity that has to do with the pen she used to sign the form, which was a heavy pen with a gold nib that the account clerk handed her as if it were a tool of some importance. And it was, she thinks now. It was a tool of some importance. The account meant she could make purchases without carrying cash. It meant she had a financial relationship with this institution that was her own and did not require her husband's signature or presence. It meant that when she went in on a Tuesday morning and bought dish towels and nightgowns, she did so as a person with credit and an account and a signature that meant something. She was a customer, not a dependent. These distinctions mattered even when they were not spoken about. Maybe especially when they were not spoken about. Now let us slow down a little, because the afternoon is coming and the light is changing, and there is a different kind of shopping happening in the store now, and it is worth seeing. By 2 o'clock, the morning crowd has shifted. The women who came in early, like Dorothy, purposeful, with lists, have mostly completed their errands. The tea room has moved through its lunch rush and is now settling into the quiet of mid-afternoon, a few women lingering over tea, the waitresses moving slowly between tables. The sales floor has a different quality to it now, not empty but spacious. The aisles are wider because there are fewer people in them. The saleswomen are attentive in a slightly different way. Not the managed attentiveness of the morning rush, but the genuine attentiveness of people who have time. A woman named Helen comes in at 2:30. She is 47, and she has taken the bus, having arrived via the stop around the corner. She is wearing a forest green dress and a brown hat with a small grosgrain ribbon at the band, and she has the slightly preoccupied air of someone who is carrying a question in her mind rather than a list on an envelope. She is not here for dish towels. She is here for something she has been circling around for weeks, something she has allowed herself to want and has not yet allowed herself to buy. She wants a new winter coat, not because her current one is worn out precisely, but because it is 7 years old and has the particular quality of a garment that has done its work faithfully and is ready to retire. It still looks presentable, it still buttons without difficulty, but it is 7 years old, and Helen knows the difference between a coat that is still functional and a coat that makes you feel like yourself, and her current one has crossed the line from the second category into the first without. She feels much warning. She goes directly to the coat department. She has thought about this. She knows what she wants, roughly. Something in a dark color, something in a good wool, something with a proper collar that buttons high when the weather turns bitter, something that will last. She has a budget, which she holds clearly in mind. She is not going to exceed it. She has exceeded it before and regretted it for the duration of the payment period, and she does not intend to do so again. The saleswoman who approaches is the same tall woman with the slight southern accent who helped Dorothy with her coat 2 autumns ago. Her name is Frances. She has been in the coat department for 9 years. She knows more about women's winter coats than most people know about anything they have spent their professional lives with. Frances reads Helen in a few seconds, the way that the very good coat saleswomen of this era could. She notes the height, the coloring, the existing coat, the quality of the hat, the way Helen holds her handbag, the direction of her gaze when she first looks at the rack. She makes several rapid assessments that are not calculations exactly, more like a kind of informed intuition built out of thousands of similar moments. She makes a plan. She does not approach immediately. She gives Helen 30 seconds to move along the rack on her own. This is the correct instinct. Helen does not want to be intercepted at the threshold. She wants to feel like she found what she found herself. Helen has her hand on a charcoal herringbone when Frances appears beside her. That is very popular this season, Frances says. And then, because she knows this formulation by itself is hollow, though I think you might find it a touch wide in the shoulder for your frame, could I show you something in a similar weight? Helen turns. She is not annoyed. She is, if anything, slightly relieved to have a collaborator. Frances brings out 3 coats. She holds each one open in turn, the way that had become an art form in this kind of selling. The coat presented as a doorway, the customer invited to step through it rather than just look at it. The first is a deep navy that Helen likes the color of but finds too boxy. The second is a warm charcoal with a slight stripe that is too similar to what she already has. The third is a forest green, very close to the green of the dress she is already wearing, which might seem like a reason not to choose it, but which instead creates the effect, when she puts it on and stands before the long-fitting mirror, of a woman who has found exactly the right thing. She does not say yes immediately. She stands in the coat for several minutes, turning slightly, checking the length at the back, pulling the collar up and then down again. Frances says very little, only watching, only available for questions. Helen looks at the price tag. It is slightly above her budget, not by an enormous amount, by enough that she will notice it for a month or so in the account statement. Frances does not see her looking at the tag, or she does, and says nothing, which is the same thing. Helen decides. She will take it. The coat gets wrapped in tissue and laid into a large box because the store does not want the coat to be damaged in transit, and Helen does not want to carry it over her arm on the bus. The box goes into a large handled bag. Helen carries it toward the elevator with the particular satisfaction of someone who has done something that required a certain amount of internal negotiation and has come out of the negotiation in possession of something good. She stops in the accessories department on the way to the elevator. Not because she needs anything there, but because the accessories department has a display of scarves this week that she saw from the corner of her eye when she came in, and that she wants to look at properly. The scarves are silk, printed in abstract patterns, in colours that go with several things she already owns. She picks one up, a long rectangle in deep rose and navy and cream, and holds it between her hands. It is exactly as soft as it looks. She buys it. She had not planned to buy it. She will not regret buying it. This is one of the specific pleasures of browsing in the way that the department store made possible. The encounter with a thing you were not looking for, the discovery that the thing is exactly right, the small transaction that costs less than the coat but feels, in its own way, equally satisfying. The scarf is not a need, it is a want. In 1953, a married woman of Helen's class could spend her own household money on a scarf without requiring permission, and this too was a freedom, quiet and unremarked upon, but real. She takes the elevator down. She collects her coat box from the pickup desk. She pushes through the revolving door. Outside, the afternoon has grown somewhat grey. The quality of light has changed from the sharp autumn morning brightness that Dorothy walked through earlier to something more diffuse, a thin cloud cover that softens the colours of everything. Helen walks toward the bus stop, the large bag in one hand, her regular handbag in the other. Her arms are full. She is warm, because the coat she has on, her old one, is the right weight for a day like this, even if it is 7 years old, and she is thinking about the green coat in the box and already deciding where she will hang it when she gets home and when she will first wear it, and that it will want a new pair of gloves to go with it, perhaps in a dark brown leather, perhaps from the glove counter she just passed. She will come back for those, she thinks. Maybe Thursday. The bus arrives. She boards it. The large bag goes on her lap. The bus is warm, full of mid-afternoon passengers, and the smell of damp wool and bus exhaust is comforting in its ordinariness after the managed atmosphere of the store. She leans her head slightly against the window. The city moves past her in its usual way. Now let us go back into the store one last time tonight and see it a little differently, because there is another angle to all of this, another set of stories happening inside those walls that runs alongside the experience of the women who are shopping there. Think about Frances, the coat saleswoman. She has been there since 9 o'clock. She will be there until 6. She is on her feet for most of that time, because the saleswomen of this era did not sit down unless they were on a break, and breaks were not frequent. She earns a salary plus commission on her sales, and the commission is a meaningful part of what she takes home, which means that every coat she sells matters to her in a direct financial sense, not abstractly. When Helen tried on the green coat and stood in the mirror for those long minutes, Frances was watching with genuine interest that was equal parts professional expertise and personal stake. She has been in this department store for 9 years. She knows the stock room. She knows the delivery schedule. She knows which manufacturers tend to have their sizing run small, so that when a woman is between 2 sizes, you suggest the larger one, not because you want to sell the more expensive fabric, but because the garment will fit better. She knows the alteration room, knows Mrs. Farkas by name, knows that if she sends someone there on a Monday afternoon, Mrs. Farkas will be less rushed than on a Thursday. This accumulated knowledge is not nothing. It is in fact the accumulated knowledge of a skilled professional in a field that was rarely spoken of as a profession, and yet Frances's work was not categorized, in the social language of this decade, in the same breath as the work of a doctor or a lawyer. She sold things. She stood at a rack and held open coats and watched women try them on and made soft, accurate comments. The fact that she was very good at it, that she had a kind of excellence that expressed itself in the long list of women who asked specifically for her when they came in, was not a status marker in the way that excellence in certain other fields would have been. She knew this. She had made peace with it in the way that people make peace with the gap between what they are worth and what they are given credit for. She went home at the end of each day with feet that ached in the particular way that standing on a concrete floor under carpet aches, which is differently from standing on concrete directly, but in a way that accumulates just the same over a 9-year career. She sat on the bus with her feet slightly extended, the way you do when you have been on them all day, and she looked out the window and thought, probably, about ordinary things, dinner, whether she remembered to call her sister back, whether the weather tomorrow would be cold enough to wear the heavier cardigan. She had sold 7 coats today. This was a good day. She would sleep well. There was also the woman who cleaned the store after closing. She arrived at 7 in the evening, when the last customers had been gently encouraged toward the exits, and the display windows had been darkened and the floor staff had gone home. She and her colleagues, 6 of them on this floor, worked from 7 until midnight. They vacuumed the carpeted sections with large industrial machines that were heavy to push and left precise parallel lines in the pile when done correctly. They waxed the marble sections. They cleaned the glass of the display cases with a solution that smelled sharply of ammonia and left no streaks, which required more effort than the smell might suggest. They emptied the waste bins. They reset the display stands where the day's browsing had disturbed them. They did not interact with customers. By the time they arrived, the customers were gone. They were in a different relationship to the store, one that was more intimate in some ways than the saleswomen's, because they saw the store without its performance on, without the lights and the customers and the managed atmosphere. They saw the back of it. Tomorrow morning the doors would open again at 9, and the managed atmosphere would reassemble itself, and Dorothy or Helen or someone else would push through the revolving door and be met by the perfume counter and the particular air of the place, and none of what happened between the closing and the opening would be visible. The cleaner had left no trace of herself. The store was again immaculate, again ready. This too is part of the story of the department store in 1953. The invisible labor that made the visible experience possible, the carefully maintained fiction that this world existed fully formed and tended itself. Outside, the evening is coming in. The street lamps are on. The bronze frames of the store windows catch the lamplight and send it back. The windows are dark now, the scenes inside them not lit. The woman in the red wool coat is invisible, a shape in the darkness, patient. Let us slow down now. Let us let the store settle into quiet for a while, because there is a particular quality to a large public building after it has closed, a quality that is hard to name but easy to feel if you have ever experienced it, the residue of the day's activity, all those hours of movement and conversation and decision and exchange seems to linger in the air for a while after the last person has left. The carpets still hold the impressions of footsteps. The display cases still bear the faint marks of hands pressed against the glass. The scarf Helen bought in its last position on the display before she lifted it. The flannel nightgowns on their wooden hangers, slightly fewer of them now than there were this morning. The gap in the rack where Dorothy's peacock blue one and dove grey one had been before they went into their box. The white towels, their stack slightly reduced. The shelf still neat because Jean restocked it from the back before she left. Small absences, evidence of the day. Think about all the objects that changed hands today in this one building, in this one city, on this one Tuesday in October 1953. The coats and the scarves and the towels and the gloves and the nightgowns and the perfume and the earrings and the china tea sets and the bolts of dress fabric and the small enamelled boxes and the children's winter boots, all of them beginning the day on a shelf or a rack or in a display case and ending it in someone's home or on their way there, or wrapped and labelled for a gift not yet given. Moving from the general to the particular, from inventory to possession, from the store's world to a woman's world, there is something in that movement that I find quietly moving. The object, which was simply an object on a shelf, becomes a part of someone's life. The white towels will dry dishes in a kitchen. The nightgowns will be worn through many winter nights. The green coat will become, over the years, the coat that Helen thinks of as her coat, not one of her coats, but the coat, until eventually it wears past its good years and she brings it to the church jumble sale, somewhat reluctantly, and someone else takes it home. The department store understood this at its best, at its most generous. It understood that it was not simply selling objects, it was offering the beginning of something. The coat in the store was a possibility. The coat in your wardrobe, worn for 7 years through all kinds of weather and occasion, was a small chapter of your life, and the store itself, with its tea room and its elevator operators and its Mrs. Farkas in the alterations room and its Frances at the coat rack and its scent of perfume and floor wax and new fabric, with its managed atmosphere and its revolving door and its bronze window frames and its great displays changed with the season, the store was also a kind of chapter, a recurring one, something you return to across years, something that was different each time you went and also essentially the same, because the essential thing about it was not any particular coat or particular saleswoman, but the world it offered to step into, the world of a place designed for you, made with you in mind, lit and heated and staffed and stocked and arranged so that coming through the door felt like a transition, felt like crossing from one register of experience into another. This is the thing that tends to get missed when people talk about nostalgia for the department stores of this era. And a great deal of people do talk about it, people who remember them and people who grew up hearing about them from parents or grandparents who remember them. The nostalgia is usually described as being about the quality of service, the personal attention, the human beings at the counters instead of the self-service model that replaced them. And those things are real. But I think the deeper thing, the thing underneath the thing, is about the experience of a public space that was designed with genuine care and attention for the people who were going to use it. You were expected there. You were wanted. The building itself, its proportions and its lighting and the way its departments flowed into one another, was an argument that your time and your presence and your choices and your comfort mattered enough to have been thought about in advance. There are not very many places left that feel that way. The store is quiet now. The cleaning crew is halfway through their work, the vacuum moving in long parallel lines down the center aisle of the second floor. The smell of the ammonia glass cleaner mingles with the lingering scent of the day's perfume samples, the two smells neither fighting nor combining but simply coexisting in the night air of the empty building. Out in the street, the city is doing what cities do in the evening, different from its daytime self. The rhythms changed, the population shifted, the light different, cars moving more slowly past the dark store windows, a bus going by with its interior lights on, the faces of the passengers visible through the glass for a moment and then gone. Somewhere further down, a door opening and closing, music for a second and then not, the ordinary music of a city putting the day away. Dorothy is home by now. She has put the towels in the kitchen drawer, the new ones folded beside the old ones that are still serviceable enough to keep for now, though she privately thinks the heavier ones she just bought will make the old ones look shabby by comparison. The nightgowns are washed and hung to dry in the bathroom, a step she does automatically with anything new from the store before she wears it, because she likes to know a garment has been through its first wash and survived it before she trusts it. She is sitting with a cup of tea, the radio on at a low volume, the October dark outside the kitchen window. She is not thinking about the store particularly. She is thinking about the week ahead, about her daughter, about whether it might rain tomorrow and what that will mean for the washing she had planned to hang out. The towels and the nightgowns have already receded into the general background of domestic life. They are simply there now, part of the house, part of the routine. The box from the store has been folded flat and put in the drawer where such things are kept, because it is a good box and boxes like that come in useful. Helen is home too, the green coat hung in the wardrobe, its tissue still around it, the plastic cover that the store put over it still in place. She has looked at it twice since she got home. The second time she stood with the wardrobe door open for longer than was strictly necessary, looking at the coat hanging there, and felt the quiet satisfaction of it, the satisfaction of having done something she had been meaning to do for months and having done it right. Her husband asked about the shopping and she told him about the coat. He said it sounded nice. He did not ask the price. She had been prepared to tell him, because she always told him, but he did not ask. She made dinner. The evening moved forward in its usual way. The green coat hung in the dark of the wardrobe. On the second floor of the store, Sheen was finishing the restock of the linens before she left for the day, her movements efficient and unhurried, folding each towel back to the same dimensions as the ones below it, the corners aligned. She had done this so many thousands of times that her hands worked without instruction from her mind, and her mind was elsewhere, somewhere pleasant, planning something, the details not important, just the general quality of the thought. She lined up the last stack, stepped back. The shelf was neat again, and tomorrow the doors would open at 9, and someone would come through them, and the day would begin in its particular way, with the perfume counter and the elevator with its brass indicator, and the saleswomen at their places, and the merchandise arranged on its racks and shelves, everything in order, everything ready, the great quiet machine of it all waiting with perfect patience to be set in motion again. Let it sit with you now, that image. The store in the early morning before the doors open, the carpet still perfect from the night cleaning, the display windows dark and still, the merchandise waiting, everything prepared, everything ready, the elevator operators not yet arrived, the floor managers not yet in, the coat racks standing in rows in the half-dark of the department, the coats on their wooden hangers, the forest green one restored to its proper place because Frances returned it to the rack when Helen chose hers, rather than the identical one. There is something about a room prepared for something that has not yet begun. The anticipation in it, the readiness of it, the way all the arrangements have been made, and now there is only the waiting. The store breathes in the morning dark. The city moves outside its windows, the earliest traffic, the delivery vehicles, the workers arriving for the first shifts, and the store is still, holding the quiet the way a theatre holds it in the minutes before the house lights go down. You are drifting now, I think, or almost drifting. The department store of 1953 is somewhere behind you, its perfumed air and its carpeted floors and its saleswomen at their counters and its tea room with the lemon pound cake and the small bud vases on the tables. Frances is somewhere behind you, and Helen in her green coat, and Dorothy with her white towels folded in the kitchen drawer, and Mrs. Farkas in the alteration room with her pincushion strapped to her wrist, and her perfectly accurate hands, and the elevator, rising slowly between the floors, the brass indicator moving from 1 to 2 to 3. The operator announces the floor in a voice that is formal and warm and exactly the same every time, and the doors open, and beyond them the sales floor stretches out in the particular light of the store, neither quite warm nor quite cool, and there is the smell, always the smell, the perfume and the floor wax and the new fabric, the smell of a place that was waiting for you. Let yourself go toward it now, or let it come toward you. There is no difference at this hour. The floor is carpeted, and the sound of your footsteps is muffled and pleasant, and the lighting is soft, and somewhere ahead of you there is something you were not looking for that is exactly right. You will find it, or it will find you. The aisles are wide and there is no hurry. There is no closing time tonight. The store simply continues gently in the particular quiet that belongs to this hour, the merchandise waiting, the displays arranged, the whole great architecture of it holding the night in its bronze-framed arms. Sleep now. Let the soft carpets be under you and the managed air around you and the elevator cables somewhere in the walls moving their slow music and the smell of the perfume counter drifting and the coat in the wardrobe in its tissue paper and the towels in the drawer and the nightgowns on the line already dry by morning, all of it waiting, all of it already yours. Good night. But let us not leave quite yet. There is more to the store, and more to the morning, and more to the particular world of 1953 that we have not yet walked through. Come back with me. The doors open at 9, remember, and we have the whole day still ahead of us. There is something I have not yet told you about the layout of the department store. Something that feels almost architectural in its deliberateness, that shaped every shopping experience inside those walls in a way that most people never consciously noticed. The layout was never an accident. It was never simply the result of fitting things where they happened to fit. The arrangement of departments, the placement of stairs and elevators, the width of the main aisles versus the narrower secondary ones, all of it had been thought about. Not just thought about, but studied, argued over, revised, studied again. Department store design in this era was a genuine professional discipline. There were experts in it, men mostly, who had spent careers understanding how people moved through retail space, where they paused, where they accelerated, where they turned back, what they noticed and what they walked past without seeing. These men had opinions about everything from the height of the ceiling to the angle at which merchandise should be displayed to the precise temperature that would encourage people to linger rather than hurry through. The temperature point is interesting in itself. Too warm and people felt sluggish, slightly uncomfortable, wanting to leave. Too cold and they moved quickly, reluctant to stop and examine anything carefully. The ideal was this particular temperature that Dorothy noticed when she walked in, neither of one thing nor the other, a temperature that said your body does not need to think about itself right now. You can put your attention elsewhere. The elsewhere was the merchandise. The ceilings in the major stores were high. This was not accidental either. A high ceiling does something to the experience of being in a room that a low one cannot do, which is to make you feel that you are in a place of some consequence, a place where the space itself has been designed generously, where someone thought it worth the expense and effort to build something larger than strictly necessary. A low-ceilinged store felt, no matter how well stocked, like a warehouse, a place where goods were stored rather than offered. The high-ceilinged store felt like a place you had been invited into. Marshall Field's in Chicago had ceilings in the main hall that were decorated with Tiffany mosaics. The glass caught the light from the dome above and scattered it in small colored pieces across the space below. People looked up when they walked in, not because they had been told to, but because something instinctive in them responded to the light, the height, the beauty of the thing. And in that moment of looking up, of being briefly made to feel small in an entirely pleasant way, they were in the store's world rather than their own. The transition had been made. Not every store had Tiffany mosaics. Most did not. But the principle held across whatever version of architectural ambition the store could afford. Grand doors, polished floors, high ceilings. The communication to the customer arriving from the street was consistent. You are entering something that took effort to build, and that effort was for you. The merchandise was also arranged in a way that expressed a particular philosophy about shopping. Things you needed were scattered throughout the building, not gathered conveniently in one place. The reason for this is exactly what you might suspect. If the things you needed were all in one easy cluster near the exit, you would buy your necessities and leave quickly, and nothing else. By distributing necessities across departments and floors, the store ensured that getting the thing you came for required moving through the store, which meant encountering the things you did not come for, which meant the possibility of buying them. This was not malicious. Or it was not only malicious, it was also in a strange way aligned with what many of the customers actually wanted from the experience, which was to move through the store, to encounter the unexpected, to browse. The store's commercial interest and the customer's experiential interest were, in this respect, aligned. The customer wanted to wander. The store wanted her to wander. This does not mean the store was not also manipulating the environment to serve its own ends. It was. But manipulation and genuine service can coexist. And in the department store of the 1950s they often did. Dorothy, who came in with a list on the back of an envelope, still spent 2 hours there. Part of that was intentional, her planned browse. Part of it was the result of moving from the second floor to the third, past the millinery she glanced at and the glove counter she lingered over. The layout did its work on her without her knowing it had done its work on her. This is what the layout was designed to accomplish. Let us talk about the windows for a moment, because the window displays of the great department stores in this era deserve their own consideration, and they are one of the things most often mentioned by people who remember this period. The window display was an art form, a distinct one, practiced by people who thought of themselves as artists, and who were, in the most legitimate sense of the word, exactly that. They were called window dressers, a term that sounds slightly diminutive, slightly comic, but which encompassed a set of skills and sensibilities that produced some of the most sophisticated public art of the mid-20th century. The window dresser worked in a space roughly the size of a large closet, a shallow rectangular void behind the plate glass, and within that space they had to create something that would stop people on the street, not just stop them, hold them, make them look, and then look again, make them feel something that they had not been feeling before they turned that corner, something that might be desire or might be nostalgia or might be a kind of ambient wonder at the fact that someone had arranged these objects in this particular way, and the result was beautiful. The great window displays of this era were theatrical in their approach. They used props, backdrops, mannequins posed with an attention to body language that was almost choreographic. They used lighting, the angle and color of it chosen as deliberately as a photographer would choose it. They changed with the seasons, and sometimes within a season, and the changing of a major department store window was a social event, something that people came downtown specifically to see. Bonwit Teller in New York employed a young Salvador Dali to design a window display in 1939, an event that ended dramatically when Dali, displeased with the store's modification of his design, pushed a bathtub through the glass from inside. This is perhaps the most extreme example of the window display as art and the conflicts that arose around it, but it illustrates something important about how seriously the form was being taken by people who took art seriously. By 1953, the window display had evolved into something more refined and in some ways more quietly powerful than the provocations of the 30s and 40s. The displays were beautiful, carefully so, without being aggressively avant-garde. They told small stories. The autumn display with the woman in the red coat and the table set with leaves and china was telling a story about a particular version of autumn domesticity, a version that felt already arrived and settled and warm. The woman in the window was not going anywhere. She was already there, in the life she had made, in the coat she had chosen, in the season she was inhabiting. Standing outside and looking in at her felt like looking through a window into someone else's afternoon, or into a version of your own afternoon that had been arranged more beautifully than your actual one. This was the emotional operation that the best window displays performed. They showed you something you half recognized, something adjacent to your own life but slightly better, and in that gap between your life and the one in the window, the desire for something was created. Not necessarily the coat, or not only the coat. Desire for the afternoon, it implied, for the ease and arrangement of a life where things were set out beautifully on tables with autumn leaves, and the light was always this color. You cannot buy that, but the coat was available, and the coat was a step toward it. This is not cynical, or it is cynical in the way that all marketing is cynical, which is also to say in the way that all human communication that is trying to create an effect is in some technical sense manipulative. The window display was an honest manipulation in at least this sense. It did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. Everyone knew the woman in the coat was a mannequin. Everyone knew the autumn leaves were silk. The display did not deceive, it invited. It said, "This is what a coat in autumn could feel like, and if that appeals to you, the coat is inside." And some of the women who stood outside and looked did go in, and some of them bought coats, and some of those coats became the coats of their lives, the ones they wore through many seasons, that their daughters saw hanging in the wardrobe and thought of as simply part of what their mother looked like. And some of those coats are in the back of closets somewhere now, or in the textile archives of museums, or gone entirely, and the women who wore them are gone too. But for this moment, on this October morning in 1953, they are here, standing in front of the window in the pale morning light, looking. Now I want to take you somewhere specific inside the store that we have not visited yet, somewhere that Dorothy passed without going in, but that exists on that third floor between the ready-to-wear and the coat section, a department that has its own particular atmosphere and its own particular history within the larger history of the store. The lingerie department. This is not a sensational destination. It was not, in 1953, a particularly charged space in the way that department store historians occasionally treat it. It was, most fundamentally, a place where women bought undergarments, practical ones mostly, a girdle, a new brassiere, a slip to go under a dress that was too sheer without one, a full-length petticoat for a skirt that needed body, a half-slip, which was a more minimal version of the same thing. These were the workhorses of a 1953 woman's wardrobe, the invisible infrastructure of her daily presentation, and buying them was an unremarkable errand, or mostly unremarkable. There was, in the lingerie department, a particular quality of transaction that existed nowhere else in the store, and that had to do with fitting. Brassieres and girdles were not sold entirely off the rack in this era, not in the better stores. They were fitted. A saleswoman would assess you, ask questions, take a measurement or two, and bring out items that were likely to work, which you tried in a small curtained dressing room and reported back on, and the saleswoman would assess your report and bring other options, and the process continued until something was right. This sounds simple. It was not simple. It required a degree of candor about your body and its actual shape and size that daily life in 1953 generally did not call for. You were in the lingerie fitting room, discussing your body with a stranger in precise terms, in terms of what it needed in order to be properly supported and contained. And you were doing so in a culture that simultaneously idealized the female body in very specific ways, and also treated any direct discussion of it as mildly improper. The best lingerie saleswomen navigated this with a matter-of-factness that was itself a kind of skill, a clinical directness that drained the situation of any potential awkwardness by treating it as simply a technical problem with a technical solution. You needed a garment that fit. She was going to help you find it. The body in question was simply a body with specific characteristics, and those characteristics determined the correct solution. This brisk competence was for many women enormously reassuring. The girdle, which requires its own brief attention, was an item that virtually every adult woman of a certain class wore in 1953, and which has become, in historical memory, one of the primary symbols of the decade's constrictions and demands on women's bodies. This is not entirely unfair. The girdle was indeed a garment that shaped and constrained the lower body, that flattened and smoothed and held in a firm hand anything that was not already the shape the fashions of the moment required. It was uncomfortable in the warm weather. It left marks. It required effort to put on and effort to remove. It was also, for many women, genuinely functional. The foundation garments of this era, of which the girdle was one, served a structural purpose in conjunction with the clothing of the time, which was itself structured in ways that modern clothing largely is not. A full skirt of the early 1950s was a garment with considerable weight and considerable architecture, and the foundation garments that went under it were part of that architecture, helping to distribute the weight, hold the proportions, keep the whole arrangement from losing its shape as the day progressed. Whether the girdle was necessary or simply expected is a question that historians of dress have been debating for decades. The answer is probably both, in different proportions for different women and different occasions. What is certainly true is that most women in this era wore one without thinking of it as oppression, because the concept of clothing as oppression was not the analytical framework they were working with. The girdle was simply what you wore, like the hat, like the gloves, like the particular shoes that went with this particular outfit and not with that one. The question of whether any of these requirements was worth the discomfort was a question that mostly lived in the private interior, if it lived anywhere, rather than being spoken aloud. Let us step away from the lingerie department and go somewhere lighter, because the afternoon is advancing and there is a part of the store we have not been to yet that I find genuinely delightful: the toy department. In October 1953, the toy department on the 5th floor of a major department store had a quality that was approximately the opposite of everything else in the building. Where the rest of the store was organized for the browsing of adults, the toy department had been set up at least partially for the experience of children, which meant that many of its rules were different. Toys were not behind glass. Toys were, where possible, out and available to touch, to pick up, to try. A child in the toy department could reach for things, could press the button on the mechanical bank and watch the small figure deposit the coin, could wind the key on the music box and hear the tinny melody, could lift the box of the chemistry set and feel its promising weight, and read the list of experiments on the side panel, and feel the particular excitement of imagining the experiments without yet having to perform them. The toy department in this season had a strong emphasis on Christmas, even though it was October, because the toy department understood better than perhaps any other department the importance of planting seeds well in advance of the purchase decision. The toys that children saw in October were the toys they would remember in November and mention in December, and the mention in December was the purchase in December, and that was the point. The toy department was playing a longer game than any other part of the store, a months-long game of desire and deferral and finally arrival. The toy department smelled differently from the rest of the store. It smelled of cardboard and the slightly chemical smell of new plastic, which was becoming a more significant component of toys in this decade as plastic technology improved and became cheaper, and it smelled of something that was not quite paint, but was the smell that wooden toys and wooden games gave off when they were new. It was a warm smell. It had something in it that was related to anticipation in the same way that certain smells are related to memories, the smell itself triggering the emotion rather than just accompanying it. A woman named Ruth was in the toy department at 2:30, studying the display of dolls with the focused attention of someone who had been given a mission. Her daughter was turning 7 in 2 weeks, and Ruth had promised herself she would have the gift sorted before the week was out, because last year she had left it too late and had the experience of arriving at the toy department 3 days before Christmas to find the specific doll her daughter had requested was sold out everywhere in the city, and the scramble to find something acceptable was one she did not intend to repeat. Ruth's daughter wanted a doll with eyes that opened and closed. She had specified this. She had specified it with the precise intensity with which small children specify things they have decided they need, a focused, uncompromising certainty that brooks no substitution, a doll with eyes that opened and closed. Ruth had written it on a piece of paper and put the paper in her coat pocket and had carried it for a week, though she did not need the paper. She had heard the specification many times. The doll display occupied 2 long tables and a section of wall-mounted shelving. There were dolls of many kinds: baby dolls in cloth bodies and bisque heads, composition dolls in various sizes, the newer hard plastic dolls that had largely replaced composition in the early 1950s and were far more durable, resistant to the chips and cracks that had made composition dolls the source of so many childhood disappointments. Fashion dolls in their boxes, dressed in miniature versions of current fashions, baby dolls that came with bottles and bibs, doll houses and doll furniture, which were technically their own category, but which lived near the dolls because the store's planners understood how these items worked together in a child's imagination. Ruth moved along the table, examining. She picked up a large baby doll in a pink dress and opened and closed its eyes, which worked, the lids moving smoothly, the blue glass eyes looking placidly at nothing as they rose and fell. The doll was heavy in her arms, a baby weight, a weight designed specifically to feel correct in the arms of a child pretending to hold a baby. She checked the price tag. Within her budget, just. She studied the face, which had the slightly idealized blandness of the doll faces of this era, the small rosebud mouth slightly open to suggest a smile. The cheeks painted a healthy pink, the saleswoman in the toy department, a young woman who had the slightly dazed quality of someone who has been answering variations of the same questions all day, told Ruth that the doll was one of their best sellers, and that she had heard from several mothers that the children loved them. Ruth asked if there were other models, and the saleswoman showed her two others, one slightly smaller and one with brown hair instead of blonde, and Ruth held each of them in turn, opening and closing the eyes, assessing the weight. She bought the one with brown hair. Her daughter had brown hair. She felt that matching this was important in a way that she could not entirely have articulated if pressed, but which had to do with the relationship between a girl and her doll, the way the doll was an extension of the girl's own sense of self, and that an extension that looked somewhat like her might be more comfortable to love. The box was large and required its own handled bag. Ruth carried it toward the elevator, the bag bumping gently against her leg. She was satisfied with this decision. She was, in the way of someone who has completed an important task ahead of schedule, lightened. The doll had been purchased. Her daughter's birthday was handled. She could think about something else now. She rode the elevator down with a man in a grey suit who was carrying a large box of his own, something that clinked faintly with each small movement of the elevator cab, and who looked out from under the brim of his hat at the brass indicator in the way that people look at things they are not really seeing. Ruth wondered what was in his box. She did not ask. The elevator doors opened and she stepped out into the perfume-scented main floor and walked toward the exit, the revolving door, and then the street. She walked toward her parked car, the bag held carefully in both hands now because the handles were beginning to strain slightly under the weight. The car was a dark green Plymouth, 4 years old, parked half a block away with the precision of someone who had been parking in this neighborhood for years and knew exactly where the space was likely to be open. She loaded the bag carefully into the back seat, in the passenger side footwell rather than on the seat, so it would not tip or slide. She checked that the bag was stable. She got into the driver's seat, set her handbag on the passenger seat, and started the engine. It turned over immediately, the way it almost always did. A small, reliable pleasure. She drove home through the afternoon city. In the back seat, the box with the doll slid very slightly in the footwell when she turned, settling against the door with a small thud. The doll inside it, in its pink box with the cellophane window, had its eyes open, fixed on the ceiling of the Plymouth blue glass eyes aimed at the blue cloth of the car's interior lining, seeing nothing, already perfect, already waiting. The store is quieter in the late afternoon. By 4 o'clock, the main floor traffic has thinned to a drift. The purposeful morning shoppers long gone. The after-work rush not quite arrived yet. This is the grey hour of the department store. Neither the bright energy of the morning nor the hurried intensity of the 6 o'clock closing push. It is the hour when the saleswomen can pause for a moment without the pause feeling like neglect, when they lean slightly against the counter and look at the floor and let their feet rest as much as standing allows. Frances has sold 11 coats today. This will turn out to be her second best day of the autumn season, exceeded only by the Saturday 2 weeks before Christmas when she will sell 16 in a single day, 6 of them in the last 90 minutes before closing. But she does not know that yet. Right now she knows 11 coats, and that her feet are significantly tired, and that there is a coffee in her future the moment she can get to the break room. She restocks the rack, pulling coats from the back of the rack to the front, checking that each one is properly on its hanger and facing the correct direction. A coat facing the wrong direction on a rack reads as careless. Frances has a mild but genuine intolerance for carelessness in her department, a feeling that the merchandise deserves better than to be put away wrong, that a coat hanging improperly is in some way being disrespected, which she knows is a slightly irrational feeling but which she has long since stopped apologizing for. The coats go on their hangers correctly, the rack faces correctly. The coat size order runs from smallest to largest from left to right. These things matter. She thinks about Helen, the woman in the forest green. She always thinks briefly about the women who choose the things she has shown them. A quick private satisfaction that is different from the satisfaction of the commission, quieter. The coat had been exactly right for that woman. Frances could see it the moment she lifted it from the rack, before Helen had even tried it on. That rightness. The way some things are simply correct for someone and you can see it from the outside before they can see it from the inside. When Helen stood in the mirror and the expression on her face shifted from consideration to something quieter and more settled, Frances had felt that small satisfaction. The right thing had found the right person. This happened in her work, and she noticed it every time, and she thought that noticing it was one of the things that kept the work from feeling like simply work. The break room is on the 7th floor, accessible via the service elevator. A different elevator from the customer ones, smaller and less finished. The walls painted a pale green that has gone slightly yellowish with the years. The break room has a coffee percolator, always on, and a table with mismatched chairs, and a window that looks out at the back of the adjacent building, which is not scenic but which does have pigeons on the ledge. And the pigeons are doing what pigeons always do, which is to walk about in their peculiar bobbing way and investigate the ledge with their beaks and generally be pigeons. And there is something in watching them that Frances has always found oddly soothing after a long stint on the floor. She pours coffee from the percolator, takes her seat near the window, and takes off her right shoe. Her feet in this particular shoe on this particular day have made their feelings clear, and she is honouring the communication. She sits for 10 minutes and drinks the coffee and watches the pigeons and does not think about coats or customers or the rack or anything in particular. This is the break room's specific gift, not the coffee or even the chair, the permission to stop, briefly and completely, and be no one's saleswoman. The coffee is strong and slightly bitter, the way break room coffee tends to be, and she drinks it with the particular appreciation of someone who has needed it for 2 hours. Now, let us go somewhere I have been meaning to take you since we first came into the store this morning. Something that most people who shopped in the 1950s department store experienced and almost certainly remember, if they are old enough to remember it, but that does not tend to appear very prominently in the histories. The fitting rooms. The fitting rooms in a major department store in this era were an interesting space. They were curtained rather than doored, in most stores, though the better stores had small individual rooms with walls that went to the ceiling and, sometimes, doors. The curtains were heavy fabric, in a colour that was neutral and forgiving, usually some shade of cream or pale gold, chosen because they could be lit in a way that made the light inside the room slightly warmer and more flattering than the main floor fluorescent. This was deliberate. The fitting room was where the purchasing decision was made, and the decision was made easier when what you saw in the mirror was slightly kinder than what you saw in ordinary light. Women who have shopped across different eras and different kinds of stores know this phenomenon. You try something on in the store and it looks one way. You bring it home and it looks another. This is not simply a matter of the item being wrong outside the store. It is partly about the light. The 1950s department store, whatever its other qualities, was very good at the light in the fitting rooms. There was also a particular quality of privacy inside the fitting room that did not exist elsewhere in the store. Elsewhere you were visible, you were observed. The saleswomen were watching, gently, from their posts. Other customers moved around you. You were in public, managing yourself accordingly. The posture correct, the face composed. Inside the curtained fitting room, you were alone with a garment and a mirror, and the garment did not care how you looked at it or what face you made, or whether you let out the breath you had been half holding since you left the house. You could turn around twice. You could pull the hem straight and then let it go. You could lift your arms and check what happened to the shoulders when you did. You could think, and you could think out loud, or very nearly, the kind of muttering that is almost not quite talking. Women in fitting rooms talk to themselves, not in any distressed way, just the running commentary of someone making a decision in private. That shoulder sits wrong. This one is better across the back. Is this the right length? I think this is the right length. Do I like this colour? I think I like this colour. Let me see it one more time. The saleswoman would occasionally speak through the curtain. "How are you getting on in there? Shall I bring another size?" And you would answer through the curtain, as if the curtain were a door, a social fiction that everyone maintained. The saleswoman on one side and you on the other. The consultation conducted through a gap in the fabric. A woman named Patricia spent 40 minutes in a fitting room on the 4th floor in the afternoon, trying on 9 blouses. She was looking for something specific, a blouse that would work with 2 different skirts she already owned, and also with a pair of wool trousers she had just bought. The trousers folded over her arm as she came in. The saleswoman understood the challenge immediately and began pulling options with the focused efficiency of someone who likes a specific problem, something that works with both the skirts and the trousers. So we want something that can go either way, dressier than casual, but not so formal it looks wrong with the skirts. What colours are the skirts? Patricia described the skirts, navy and charcoal, and the trousers, camel. "All right," the saleswoman said, and went away and came back with an armful. The 9 blouses were tried in sequence. Some were wrong immediately, dismissed in the first 30 seconds. One in a silk charmeuse that was beautiful but required dry cleaning, and Patricia was not willing to commit to that. One in a slightly stiff cotton poplin that was fine, but that Patricia felt something unidentifiable about. A lukewarm feeling she had learned to distrust when shopping for things she intended to wear often. 2 that were almost right, that she went back to, trying each again after having tried the others, comparing. The one she chose was a cream silk blouse with a small pointed collar and pearl buttons. Simple. The kind of blouse that does not call attention to itself and is therefore exactly right with everything. She had tried it 3rd of the 9 and spent the rest of the time checking whether anything was better, and nothing was, and she came back to it knowing she would buy it, which she did, with the particular satisfaction of having done due diligence and arrived at the correct answer. Patricia took the blouse to the register and paid. The saleswoman wrapped it in tissue and folded it into a flat box and slid it into a bag. Patricia thanked her. The saleswoman said, "Come back soon." It was not a formula, or not only a formula. It was the thing you said at the end of a transaction that had gone well, that had resulted in the right thing being found. Outside on the street, the afternoon had deepened further. The shadows were longer. The light had gone from the clear autumn pale of the morning to the particular amber of late afternoon, when the sun is lower and the light comes at a different angle and catches the buildings across the street in a way that makes them look, briefly, very beautiful. Patricia walked toward the car park. She was thinking about the cream blouse, specifically about how it would look with the camel trousers, and whether she should wear that combination to her sister's birthday dinner next month. She thought she should. She thought the collar would look right with her pearl earrings. She thought she had spent the money wisely, which she was not always certain about when shopping, but was today. She got into her car, drove home, and we are going to follow her, just for a moment, just to see the blouse arrive in its new home, because this is the part of the department store story that the store itself never saw, the after part, the life of the purchased object out in the world it had been chosen for. Patricia lived 15 minutes from the store, in a neighbourhood of houses that were similar to one another in the way that suburban streets of the 1950s often were. The same general proportions, the same set of materials, differentiated by garden arrangements and paint colours and the small choices of the people who lived inside them. Her house was a 2-story wood frame with white clapboard siding and dark green shutters, and there were asters in the front garden, which at this point in October were slightly past their peak but still colourful, the purple and pink and white of them moving slightly in the afternoon wind. She let herself in with her key, set her handbag on the small table just inside the door, unwound her scarf from her neck. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet in the middle of a weekday afternoon when the children are still at school, a particular quality of quiet that is different from evening quiet or weekend quiet, something to do with the absence of the possibility of anyone arriving unexpectedly. The house to itself, Patricia to herself. She took the box upstairs to the bedroom and opened it at the dressing table, lifted the blouse from the tissue, shook it gently to release the fold lines, held it up to the light, and looked at it, the cream silk luminous in the afternoon sun coming through the window. She hung it on the wardrobe door to air, stood looking at it for a moment, then she went downstairs to start dinner. This is the life that the department store made possible. Not in a grand sense, not in any sense that required particular comment or notice. Simply the ordinary life of a woman who wore a blouse and found the right one and brought it home on a Tuesday afternoon in October and hung it on the wardrobe door to air. A moment so small it would not even appear in any diary, because who writes down the arrival of a new blouse? Nobody. It was simply part of the ongoing business of being a person with a wardrobe and a life, and the particular domestic competence that went into maintaining both. And the blouse would last, in the way that well-made clothing of this era tended to last, through many seasons and many occasions, developing in those years the slight softness that silk takes on with repeated washing and wearing, becoming eventually one of those garments that you have owned for so long you cannot quite remember acquiring it, that simply seems always to have been there, which was in its own way the greatest success a piece of clothing could achieve. The department store closed its doors at 6 o'clock precisely. The closure was accomplished by stages. At 5:30 the overhead announcements began, a voice over the store's public address system, warm but firm, informing customers that the store would be closing in 30 minutes and thanking them for their patronage today. This was the first signal. It moved through all the departments like a tide, and the effect was immediate. Customers beginning to gather their purchases, heading toward registers or pickup desks, moving toward the exits with a directional intention that had not been there before the announcement. At 5:45 the lights in some sections were dimmed slightly. A second signal, gentler than an announcement, more atmospheric. The toy department went slightly darker. The upper floor departments, already quieter, became quieter still. The elevator operators continued their runs, but with a kind of deliberate finality to each announcement. Third floor, ladies ready to wear, millinery lingerie. Please make your way toward the exits. By 5:50 the registers on the upper floors were beginning to close. The saleswomen straightened their counters, returned stray items to their proper places, folded the tissue paper back into the drawers, counted their register drawers with the quick efficiency of long practice. At 6 o'clock exactly, the front doors were locked. The few customers who had been caught in a last-minute transaction were processed through their registers with the slightly hurried focus of a closing time that was truly closing. The floor managers walked their departments. The elevator operators made their final runs. The store was empty by 6:15. The cleaning crew arrived at 7, and in between, in that small window of neither nor, the store was simply itself, without either the people it was built for or the people who maintained it. The merchandise on its racks and shelves, the displays in the windows, the woman in the red coat still standing with her autumn leaves, visible from the street now in the day's last light, the city moving past her without stopping. The mannequin's eyes, if they could see, would see the street going on, the bus, the couple walking past, the man in the coat with his collar turned up against the cooling air, the woman with the 2 shopping bags who glances at the window in passing, and for just a moment slows, taking in the tableau, before the pace of the pavement carries her on. The city does not pause for its own beauty. That is one of the consistent things about cities. They are beautiful, sometimes extraordinarily so, in the way that arrangements of light and height and movement and weather produce beauty accidentally as a byproduct of simply being what they are. And the people in them mostly do not stop to look, because they are going somewhere, because there is always somewhere to be going, because the city does not give you much reason to stop, but the window stops some of them. For a moment. Not all of them. A few, and that is enough. That was always in some sense the point. Let the city slow now, because it is getting late and the store has been closed for some time, and the cleaning crew has finished its work and gone home, and the floor is vacuumed and the glass is clean and the merchandise is in its proper order waiting for tomorrow, and the tomorrow that is waiting will be a Wednesday, and the Wednesday will have its own particular character, slightly different from Tuesday, because the people who come in on Wednesdays tend toward the slightly older end of the regular shoppers, women who have scheduled their shopping for this day out of preference or habit, women who have been coming in on Wednesdays since their children were small, and who now come in on Wednesdays still, because the habit has become the shape of the week, and the shape of the week is comfortable in its predictability. Frances will be there on Wednesday. She will sell coats, not as many as today perhaps, it being midweek, but she will sell them with the same attention, the same quiet reading of each woman who comes to the rack, the same patience with the ones who need time, the same economy of movement when she sees immediately what is right. Jean will be there, restocking the linens from the delivery that arrives Wednesday mornings, checking the stack heights and the colour arrangements with the same slightly precise energy she brought to it today, and the elevator operator with the grey hair will make her runs with the same warm formality, announcing each floor with the same care as if it were a destination worth the ceremony of being named. And the store will open at 9, and someone will push through the revolving door, and the smell of the cosmetics counter will meet them, and the particular temperature that is neither warm nor cool, and the light that is neither natural nor artificial, but something the store made for itself. And everything will be, for this morning, for this hour, for however long they choose to stay, for them. That is the thing that the great department stores of this era understood and offered, in their way, to the women who came through their doors. A world designed with you in mind, staffed and arranged and maintained for your benefit, your ease, your pleasure. A world where your presence was expected, where your taste was catered to, where your time was worth the effort of all this enormous apparatus of floor staff and stock rooms and delivery vans and alteration rooms and window dressers and elevator operators and cleaning crews. You were wanted there. The building knew you were coming, and the door, when you pushed it, revolved easily on its axis and opened, as it always did, as it was designed to do, turning you from the street into somewhere else entirely, somewhere warm and scented and carefully lit, where the day's ordinary weight could for a while simply rest. Feel the carpet under your feet now, the slight softness of it, the muffled quiet of a space where sound is absorbed by fabric and height and carefully placed things, the perfume counter to your left, the bottles catching the light, the elevator ahead, with its brass indicator, its needle beginning to move, the floors above you, each one its own world, the tear room on the 4th floor, the tablecloths white and pressed, the bud vase with its chrysanthemums, the coat rack in the corner of the women's department, the coats in their rows, the colours of autumn and winter, charcoal and forest green and deep navy and warm camel, the lingerie department quiet and lit softly, the toy department with its smell of cardboard and new plastic and wood, the millinery with the grey felt hat on its stand, waiting, the alterations room, the pinch of chalk, the press of iron, Mrs. Farkas's hands moving without instruction, the stock room in its fluorescent light, the shelves to the ceiling, the break room, pigeons on the ledge, the window dresser, somewhere in the building already thinking about November, all of it here, all of it assembled with care, maintained with effort, made available with a generosity that the commerce inside it does not diminish. Exactly, because commerce and generosity are not always at odds, because the transaction and the pleasure can be the same thing, because being sold something you wanted, in a place that was good to be in, by someone who knew their work, is not a lesser experience simply because money changed hands. Let it all settle around you now. The store in the evening, closed and quiet, the street beyond the window, the lamps on, the woman in the red coat still standing in her window, the silk autumn leaves on the table, the china set out for a meal that will never be eaten. She does not need to eat. She is already in the season she was placed in. The autumn has arrived, the way it does every year, and she is there for it, fully present, properly dressed, the light falling across her in exactly the way that was intended. She has been here before, she will be here tomorrow and next autumn, and all the autumns that the display allows, standing in the particular amber light of an October window, patient as objects are patient, available as a good coat is available, waiting for someone on the pavement to slow, to look, to think, yes, that. Let her wait. Let the city move past. Let the street lamps hold their small warm circles on the pavement. Let the autumn go on being autumn, as it has been doing all day, as it will do through the night, as it does every year without needing to be asked. And let yourself go further down into wherever you are right now, in whatever room this is, in whatever city or town or quiet place this is, With whatever darkness is outside your window tonight, the department store of 1953 is somewhere behind you now. You have been inside it long enough to know it. The smell of it, the particular hum of it in the late morning, when the traffic of the day is at its warmest and most purposeful, the elevator, the carpet, the coats in their rows, Dorothy at home with her dish towels in the drawer, Helen's green coat in the tissue, waiting for its first real cold morning. Ruth's daughter who does not yet know a doll is coming. Patricia's cream blouse on the wardrobe door, luminous in the last of the afternoon light. All of it settled now into its proper place in the day, the objects distributed across the city into the lives they were chosen for. The store itself empty and quiet, the cleaning finished, the floor ready, the window in the dark, the needle of the elevator indicator at rest, the coats in their rows. Let everything rest now. Let it all be still. The day is done, and it was a good one, as ordinary days tend to be when you pay them enough attention to notice what was good in them. The carpet was soft, the light was right. Something was found that had been looked for. Someone was helped. A coat was exactly right on the woman who chose it, and she knew it when she saw herself in the mirror, and that small knowing is the kind of thing that stays with you, quietly, longer than you might expect. Longer than you might expect. Sleep well tonight. Whatever is outside your window, let it be there without you for a little while. Let the store go on without you. It's Tuesday finished. It's Wednesday already on its way. The whole great patient world of it, waiting as it always waits, ready as it always is, the doors still on their hinges, the carpet still on the floor, the perfume counter still at the threshold between the street and everything else. Everything else. Good night. And yet, because the night is long and there is more in this world worth knowing, let us go back once more. Not to the store exactly, or not only to the store. Let us go to some of the things that surrounded it, that made it possible, that connected it to the larger world of the 1950s in ways that are interesting and worth understanding, and that I think you might not have considered. The department store did not exist in isolation. Nothing ever does. It existed inside a culture, a particular moment in American and British economic life, a particular relationship between production and consumption, and aspiration and identity, that the 1950s produced almost like a climate produces weather, as the natural result of a specific set of conditions. The conditions were these. The Second World War had ended 8 years before. The men had come home. The factories that had been producing weapons and military equipment had turned their machinery to consumer goods, and the consumer goods were arriving in quantities and varieties that the pre-war and wartime years had made impossible. Rationing was over. Not just over in the technical sense, but over in the emotional sense. The sense that the period of scarcity had ended and the period of abundance had genuinely and reliably arrived, and that this time it was going to stay. This feeling of abundance was not simply economic, it was moral. It was felt as a reward, as the right outcome of a struggle that had been terrible and necessary and won. The abundance felt earned. The refrigerators and the cars and the televisions and the new coats from the department store felt like what was supposed to happen after the war, like the world paying out what it owed. This meant that buying things had in this era a slightly different quality than it typically does. It meant that the department store and the women who shopped in it and the saleswomen who helped them were all participating in something that felt at a cultural level like a kind of affirmation. Yes, the war is over. Yes, we came through it. Yes, the green coat is possible. Yes, the good dish towels and the flannel nightgown and the cream silk blouse and the doll with eyes that open and close. Yes to all of it. Yes, Dorothy and Helen and Ruth and Patricia did not walk around thinking about the war or its aftermath in any conscious way while they shopped. Nobody would. But the sense of it was there, underneath the ordinary Tuesday. The sense that having and choosing and buying, in a world that had recently been a world of not having and rationing and making do, was not a trivial activity. It was a form of living freely in a world that had briefly made freedom precarious. The economy was expanding. This sounds like a dry fact, but it had specific daily consequences for the women in this store. More families had more disposable income in 1953 than they had had 10 years before. Not enormous incomes, not for most of the women shopping here, but enough, a margin above necessity, a margin that could go toward the coat or the nightgown or the scarf. The margin was the thing. The margin was what made the department store experience what it was. Without a margin, the store was simply a building full of things you could not buy. With a margin, it was something else, something that opened. The shopping experience was also shaped by the physical expansion of the American city in this era, the growth of suburbs and the increase in car ownership that made suburban living practical. The department store in the downtown core was still in 1953 the primary one. The great suburban shopping centers that would eventually compete with it and ultimately undermine it were beginning to appear but were not yet dominant. The downtown store was still where you went for the serious shopping, the good shops, the proper experience. If you lived in the suburbs, as more and more women did, you drove in or took the bus specifically to go to the downtown store. The journey itself was part of the day. Patricia drove 15 minutes. Dorothy took the bus. Helen also took the bus. Ruth had her green Plymouth. The logistics of getting to the store were different for each of them, but the act of getting there was the same. A deliberate choice, a specific destination. You went downtown to go to the store. This was a different relationship to the shopping experience than the drive to the strip mall that would become common in the following decades. It was an event with a beginning and an end, a destination chosen and arrived at, a day made around the visit, which brings us back, in its own way, to the hat. You wore your hat because you were going somewhere. The hat was the marker that this day was different from a day spent at home, not radically different, not dressed for a formal occasion, but different in the way that going out into the public world was different from staying in the private world of the house. The hat was the signal to others, yes, but also to yourself. I am going somewhere today. I am a person in the world today, not just in the house. The hat was a form of self-declaration. There was a whole vocabulary of dress in this era that operated on these distinctions. The distinctions between public and private, between going out and staying in, between occasions and ordinary days. And the department store was one of the primary occasions around which this vocabulary was organized. Not the most formal occasion, not the way that church or a dinner party was formal, but an occasion nonetheless, a designation that called for a particular set of choices made before you left the house. The women who came through the revolving door were mostly dressed for having come through a revolving door. The good coat, the hat, the gloves, the handbag that matched or coordinated with the shoes, the dress or skirt that was the right weight for the weather, the shoes themselves, which were almost certainly not the shoes worn for gardening or housework or the very casual errands. These were shopping shoes, which meant they were heels typically, or the low block heels that were acceptable for a day of walking. Heels and a day of walking in a department store. This also deserves a moment. The women who spent hours in the department stores of this era did so in heels. This is simply a fact of what women wore on their feet for public occasions in 1953. The heels might be lower than evening heels, might be a more practical shape, but they were heels. And the floors of the department store under the carpet were concrete, and the carpet absorbed some but not all of the impact, and the impact accumulated over the course of a morning or an afternoon in the particular way that wearing heels on hard surfaces accumulates, settling eventually into the low ache of the forefoot and the particular fatigue that women who have spent a day in heels know entirely, and that no description fully conveys to someone who has not. And yet the heels were worn. Not because women were forced to wear them in any direct sense, because wearing them was part of the vocabulary of public dressing that the occasion called for, and the occasion was something they were choosing to participate in, and participating in it on the terms it set was part of what made the participation meaningful. This is not a comfortable calculus to sit with, and it is not one I want to over-resolve, because the truth is that it was complicated, the way most things about women's choices in this era were complicated, shaped by expectation and desire and social pressure and genuine preference in proportions that varied from woman to woman and that no one was ever simply asked about. Dorothy's feet by the time she got back on the bus were slightly tired. She noticed this without particularly minding it. She shifted her weight slightly in the seat. The bus moved through the afternoon city, and outside the window the buildings went past, and she thought about dinner. and the rest of the day, and nothing in particular, let us go somewhere else inside the store that we have not yet visited. We have spent most of our time in the clothing and housewares departments, which makes sense because those are where most of the shopping happened. But there was a department on the main floor, near the elevators, that I want to tell you about because it was one of the more interesting spaces in the store and one whose existence has largely been forgotten. The stationery and gift wrapping department. Not all stores had a dedicated version of this. Some had a small section within another department, but the better stores had a proper stationery section, with writing paper and envelopes and cards and ribbons and wrapping paper and boxes and the various implements and materials of the correspondence-heavy social life of the 1950s. Because correspondence was heavy in this era, the thank you note was not optional. The invitation required a written response. The birthday card was expected. The condolence note was an obligation so serious that failing to send one was a social infraction that could last for years in the memory of the person who did not receive it. Patricia, who we watched in the fitting room, was also one of those women who took stationery seriously, whose writing desk had its proper box of correspondence paper and its fountain pen always filled with good ink. She had bought her current set of writing paper here, at the stationery counter 2 months ago, a cream-laid paper with a slight texture, with matching envelopes that closed with the satisfying resistance of good paper meeting good glue. She had bought a box of 50 sheets and a corresponding number of envelopes, and she was perhaps a third of the way through them, which gave her the slight satisfaction of being a person who was not running short of things she needed. The stationery counter also sold greeting cards, displayed in a rotating stand that occupied a corner of the department. The cards of this era were different from the cards that would follow in subsequent decades. They were more formally designed, often with a verse inside that had the slight formality of a greeting that had been considered, that was in some minimal sense a composition. They were printed on heavier stock. The birthday cards had a particular kind of controlled festivity, celebratory without being loud, cheerful in a restrained way. The sympathy cards were dignified, the words inside them choosing very carefully between consolation and overstatement. Ruth spent 5 minutes at the card stand because she needed a birthday card for the party that would accompany the doll. A card that was 7-year-old appropriate without being so childish that it looked like she had not thought about it. She found one with a picture of a garden and a poem about growing, which seemed right, and bought it, and slid it into her handbag next to the compact. She would write in it at home, at the kitchen table, with her good pen, carefully, because the card to her daughter was going to be read and kept, possibly for years. Children kept birthday cards. Ruth knew this because she had kept some of her own, from childhood, still in a small box in the back of the linen cupboard. The ink slightly faded now, but the cards themselves still sturdy, still legible, still holding whatever the handwriting held of the person who had sent them. Her mother had sent her a birthday card every year of her life, up until 3 years ago, when her mother died. The last card was still in the box, set on top of the others, distinguished from them by being more recent and also by being final. Ruth did not look at the cards often. She knew they were there, and that was enough. She moved away from the card stand, the card in her handbag, and walked toward the exit. One more department, before we let the store fully settle into its evening quiet. The china and glass department on the 6th floor. This is the floor Dorothy mentioned, the one she knows has gentle lighting and the view down the length of the street from the window. The china department was, in the department store of this era, one of the floors most strongly associated with a specific life event, which was marriage. Young women who were engaged, or who had recently married, or who were shopping for someone who was, came to the china department to look at patterns and to register, to make the formal list of what they wanted and needed for their new household that the store would then make available to the people buying them wedding gifts. The bridal registry. This too was a department store invention, or an innovation that the department stores of the 1920s and 30s had formalized and made systematic. Before the registry, you bought a wedding gift based on your own assessment of what the couple needed or would like, and the result was the traditional chaos of duplicates and mismatched things. The registry organized this, gave you a specific destination within the store, a list of specific items in specific patterns that the couple had indicated they wanted, and allowed you to select something from the list that had not yet been purchased by someone else. This was, when you think about it, a rather clever solution to a social problem, and it served several interests simultaneously. The store got more sales because people bought from the registry rather than buying things elsewhere. The couple got things they actually wanted. The gift giver was relieved of the anxiety of choosing wrong. Everyone benefited, or nearly everyone, which is about as well as social institutions tend to work. The china on the 6th floor was arranged in patterns, each one occupying its own section of display shelving. The pieces set out as if for a dinner table already laid, so that you could see how the dinner plate and the salad plate and the soup bowl and the bread plate and the cup and saucer worked together, how the pattern looked across a full setting rather than just on a single piece. The lighting here, as Dorothy noted, was softer. This was right for china. Hard fluorescent light unkindly revealed the way fine china is slightly translucent, the way the light passes through the thinner sections of bone china in a way that is beautiful but which under hard bright light looked merely pallid. The soft lighting of the 6th floor caught the china correctly, made the patterns glow, made the white ground look warm rather than cold. A woman named Caroline was there in the early afternoon, not shopping for herself. She was shopping for her niece who was getting married in the spring, and she had the niece's registry card in her handbag, a small card printed with the pattern name and the pieces still needed, and the reference numbers for each. Caroline was 61 years old, with the careful, composed manner of a woman who had been managing things efficiently for decades, and who brought that same managerial quality to the selecting of wedding gifts. She moved through the china department with the card in one hand and her glasses on, examining each piece on the shelves, comparing the actual china to the printed pattern name, because she wanted to confirm she liked what she was buying, rather than simply following a number on a card. She was buying a soup tureen. This had been her assignment, which she had given herself, because she had noticed the soup tureen on the registry had not yet been purchased, and she wanted it to be from her rather than from someone else. A soup tureen was a particular kind of gift. It was not a necessary item in the modern household, not in the way that dinner plates were necessary. Most couples setting up their households in 1953 did not in practice serve soup from a tureen very often. The tureen was for company, for Sunday dinners, for Christmas, for the occasions when the table was set properly and the meal was served in courses and the soup arrived in a vessel that said, "This household takes dinner seriously." Caroline had a soup tureen herself, given to her by an aunt at her own wedding, and she had used it perhaps a dozen times in 30 years of marriage, and each of those times had been in its own small way special. The weight of the tureen as she carried it to the table, the slight ceremony of lifting the lid, the steam rising. She was giving her niece this, not just the object but the dozen special occasions it was the container for. She thought about this briefly, standing in front of the display shelf with her glasses on and her niece's registry card in her hand, and then she indicated to the saleswoman that she would take the tureen. The saleswoman wrapped it with the particular care that expensive breakable objects require. Layer after layer of tissue, the fragile lid wrapped separately and nestled inside, the whole assembly cushioned in the box with more tissue, the box closed and taped. The package was sizable. The saleswoman asked if she would like it sent, and Caroline considered this. Her niece's apartment was across the city, and she was not sure her niece would be home this week, and the tureen was heavy, and she had come on the bus. Yes, she said, please send it. She gave the address and the card. The saleswoman noted the delivery details. The tureen would arrive in 2 or 3 days, in its layered tissue, to be found at the apartment door, or held by the building manager until the niece came home. Caroline paid, including the delivery charge, and moved toward the elevator. She had been efficient. She had confirmed the pattern and the quality, and had liked them both. She had sent the gift. The task was done. She rode the elevator down, the brass indicator moving through the floors, and emerged on the main floor and moved toward the revolving door and the street. And outside, the afternoon was doing what October afternoons do, the light already beginning its early decline toward evening, the temperature dropping slightly, the air taking on the clean edge of coming dark. Caroline pulled her coat closer and walked toward the bus stop. The soup tureen was on its way. The niece would open it in a few days and hold the lid in her hands and think about what to serve in it and when. She would use it fewer times than she expected. She would keep it for 40 years, wrapped in the same tissue that Caroline chose at the store, stored on a high shelf in the kitchen, taken down for company, for Christmas, for the occasions when the table was set properly and the occasion deserved the weight and ceremony of it. She would think of Caroline each time she brought it out, briefly, automatically, the way you think of the person who gave you a thing when you used the thing, not with grief eventually, though Caroline would be gone long before the niece stopped using the tureen, just with that particular warm acknowledgement that objects carry, the way they hold the presence of the people who chose them and wrapped them and sent them to you across the city in the autumn of a year you were about to be married. Objects are patient with this. They carry it lightly, without effort, for as long as they last, which can be a very long time. Now the store is quiet. Now truly quiet. The evening crew finished their work an hour ago, the night settling in around the building the way night settles in around any large structure. The stone of it holding the day's warmth as the air outside cools, the windows dark, the street outside going through its late evening rhythms, and somewhere in the city, the green coat is in its wardrobe, and the cream blouse is on its wardrobe door, or has been taken down now and hung properly inside, the hanger back on the rod with the rest of them, the blouse finding its place among the others, and the white dish towels are in the kitchen drawer, still smelling slightly of the store, that particular blend of packaging and newness that will be washed out the first time they go through the laundry, and after which they will simply smell like dish towels, and belong entirely to the kitchen rather than partly to the store. And the flannel nightgowns are still drying, or are dry now, taken from the bathroom line and folded in the drawer, the peacock blue one and the dove grey one side by side, slightly rough in their newness, the brushed cotton not yet softened by the wearing that will come, and the doll in her box is on a high shelf in a closet, not the closet in the bedroom, another one, the one that is not visible from the room, the one where the birthday things are kept out of reach of small curious hands. The doll's eyes are closed in the box, because the box is lying flat and the mechanism requires a certain orientation to be open, and in the dark of the closed closet the doll sleeps, and the soup tureen is in a van somewhere, or in a storage facility, or already delivered, depending on when we are arriving in this particular thread of the evening, wrapped in its tissue in its box waiting to be found, all the objects of the day, distributed, settled, in their new places, becoming familiar, becoming simply part of the household rather than recently acquired. The line between acquisition and ownership already beginning to blur the way it does immediately, the moment the thing passes through the door and into the domestic space that will absorb it. Let the city be quiet now. Let the store be dark and ready. Let the cleaning crew's work hold through the night, the carpets still bearing their precise parallel lines, the glass of the display cases clear, the shelves properly arranged. Let everything be ready for tomorrow, for the Wednesday crowd, for the elevator at 9, for the brass indicator beginning its first sweep of the morning. Let the October night do what October nights do, which is to be clear and cold and particular about stars, the way autumn nights are when the humidity of summer has finally left and the air has that quality of sharpness that makes the stars look closer than usual, more present, more like objects in the space above the city rather than simply the general backdrop of night. The department store's roof against that sky, the building's plain upper stories, the rooftop water towers, the pigeons settled in for the night along the ledge of the 7th floor where the break room window is, their round shapes still in the dark, their particular pigeon warmth managing the October air without apparent difficulty, the street below, the lamps, the mannequin in the window, the woman in the red coat, standing in the dark of the display with her autumn leaves on the table beside her. She is, if you could see her now, simply a shape against the darker background, the red of the coat not visible, everything reduced to form, but you know the coat is red. You know the leaves are gold and rust. You know the table is set with the right china, You know this because you have stood outside and looked through the glass, and the whole small world of the display was clear to you in the day's good light. It is still there, in the dark, waiting, as things wait. Go to sleep now. Let the department store of 1953 recede into the gentle distance of stories told and listened to and carried quietly. Let Dorothy and Helen and Ruth and Patricia have their evenings, their dinners, their conversations, their particular October nights that we will not follow them into, because those belong to them and to the ordinary privacy of an ordinary life that does not need a narrator. Let Frances have her feet up, finally, in whatever chair is in whatever room she goes home to, her heels on the floor beside the chair, her feet in their stockings resting on the ottoman her sister gave her, the specific relief of this that no one can fully appreciate who has not been on their feet on concrete all day. Let Mrs. Farkas fold her hands in her lap on the bus home, the pincushion removed from her wrist, the slight mark it left on her skin already fading. She is thinking about nothing in particular. Or she is thinking in Hungarian, which is what she does when she is tired, her thoughts reverting to the language of her childhood, as if the day's work in English has been sufficient, and now at the end, she is allowed to rest in the sounds she grew up with. She gets off at her stop. The evening is quiet. The city moves around her without requiring anything of her. She walks to her building. She goes inside. The day is done. Somewhere the soup tureen is travelling through the dark in a delivery van, careful on the corners, the tissue holding. Somewhere the green coat is in its wardrobe, the October night on the other side of the window from it, the temperature dropping, the warrant for the coat becoming clearer with each degree. Somewhere in a room not unlike the one you were in, a woman of the 1950s is lying in her bed with the window cracked 2 inches at the top, the way the health manuals recommended, the cold air moving faintly through the room, her flannel nightgown warm enough against it, her feet finding the warm spot at the bottom of the bed, her hand resting flat on the blanket over her chest, the room going dark around her as the lamp is turned off, the ceiling above her, the darkness, the particular quality of the end of a day that involved doing things, real things, with the satisfying density of actual errands completed, of objects found and chosen and brought home, the dish towels in the drawer, the nightgown on the body, the day completely done. Let yourself join her in the dark now. Let the ceiling be above you too, whatever ceiling this is, wherever you are. Let the thing outside the window do what it does, rain or stars, or the orange glow of a city at night, or the deep countryside dark that has no glow in it at all. Let the flannel settle against you, or the cotton, or whatever warmth you have arranged around yourself in this late hour. Let the store be dark and closed and ready. Let the mannequin stand in her window. Let the coat rack stand in its corner, the coats patient in their rows. Let the elevator rest at the ground floor, the needle of the brass indicator pointing steadily at 1, waiting for morning. Let the morning come in its own time. Let the night be long and quiet and kind. You have been somewhere real tonight. Somewhere that people loved and used and knew and that shaped their days in small but genuine ways. You have smelled the perfume counter and felt the carpet and heard the elevator operator announce the floors. You have chosen things and wrapped things and carried them home through the October air. Let all of it be yours now. Let it rest. Good night. But there is one more thing before sleep fully comes. One more room in the store I want you to see. I have been thinking about whether to take you there or not, and I have decided yes, because it is part of the picture, and to leave it out would be to give you the store without one of its genuinely interesting dimensions. Come back with me, not to the selling floor, not exactly, to the office floor, which in most major department stores occupied the top level or part of it, a floor that customers rarely if ever visited, that existed entirely to support the activity happening on the floors below, the buying offices. The buyers were the people who decided what the store would sell. They travelled. They went to New York twice a year for the major fashion markets, where the manufacturers and the designers showed their lines for the coming seasons, and the buyers for every department store in the country moved through the showrooms and made their selections. They went to market in the way that phrase is used in the trade, with its flavour of expedition and expertise, and the particular authority of someone whose professional function was to have better taste and better commercial instincts than the people around them. The buyers in the women's clothing departments of the major stores in this era were frequently women. This is worth pausing on because it is one of the less recognized instances of women holding genuine professional authority in the 1950s. The buyer was not a secretary. She was not an assistant. She was the person who decided what the store would carry, in what quantities, at what price points, and she made these decisions based on a complex combination of taste, market knowledge, customer understanding, and commercial calculation. She had a budget, a substantial one. She spent it on behalf of the store in the showrooms of New York and occasionally Paris, selecting the things she believed her customers would want and buy. If she was right, the season went well, the inventory turned, the department hit its targets and she was valued. If she was wrong, the season went poorly. The markdown rack filled up with unsold merchandise, and her judgment was called into question in ways that were explicit and sometimes terminal. This was real professional accountability, the kind that produced real professional competence over time. In the women who survived in it, a calibrated understanding of their customers that was built from years of observation, of attending to what sold and what did not, of listening to the saleswomen on the floor who had the most direct access to what the customer actually said and did, as opposed to what she said she would do. The buyer for the women's coat department in our store was a woman of 43 named Margaret, which is not the same Margaret who appeared in a previous script and who had a different life entirely, but a new Margaret, a Margaret who wore well-tailored dark suits to work and had opinions about fabric that could fill a room, and who had been buying coats for 17 years and knew more about the women who wore them than the women sometimes knew about themselves. Margaret had been to New York in August for the fall and winter showings. She had walked through 15 manufacturer showrooms in 3 days, which is an experience of concentrated decision-making that would exhaust most people, and that Margaret found not exactly pleasant, but genuinely energizing in the way that doing the thing you are very good at tends to be energizing, even when it is also exhausting. She had a system. She looked at everything first, without making any notes, letting the whole range register. Then she went back to the beginning and made her cuts, hard and fast, eliminating things that were not right for her customers, or not right at the price point. Then she went back a third time, more slowly, to the things that had survived the second pass, and this is where the actual selecting happened. The close evaluation of construction and weight and detail and how a thing would photograph and how it would look on the rack, and whether it was the kind of thing that a woman could stand in front of a mirror in and feel immediately, or whether it would require the kind of explaining that always indicated the thing was not quite right. She had an eye for the immediately right thing. This was her talent, the one that had kept her in the job through 17 years of twice-yearly markets. She could look at a coat in a showroom and see it on Francis's rack, and through that imagined rack see it on the women who would come and stand in front of the mirror in it, and she could make a reasonable assessment, not always correct, but correct often enough, of whether that coat was the one or whether it was close but not quite the one. The forest green coat that Helen bought had been one of Margaret's selections. She had seen it in the showroom in August and felt the immediate rightness of it. The particular green that was neither too muted nor too vivid, the weight of the wool that was serious enough to justify the price, the cut that was generous enough for a range of bodies without being shapeless. She had ordered 32 of them in the range of available sizes. By the day we visited the store, 3 had been sold. Helen's was the 4th. Margaret did not know this on any given day. She did not stand in the buying office tracking individual sales at the level of individual coats. She had quarterly reports, seasonal reports, the feedback of the floor managers who knew which categories were moving and which were sitting. She would know, by the end of the season, that the forest green had been a good choice, that it had sold well, that she had been right about the women who would want it, but she would not know about Helen. She would not know about the 45 minutes with Francis, or the way Helen stood in the mirror with that particular expression that settled into certainty. The buyers never know the individual stories. This is the gap at the center of the whole enterprise. The person who chose the thing and the person who needed the thing almost never meet, and yet the thing was right, which suggests that understanding, even at a distance, even through the abstractions of market knowledge and commercial instinct, can produce something real and good and needed by a specific person in a specific moment. This is not a guarantee. It is not even a reliable outcome. Most of the time the buyer guesses and is somewhat right and somewhat wrong, and the markdown rack gets the coats that were somewhat wrong, and the things that were right sell through, and the season ends and there is a reckoning and then a new market to go to. But occasionally the thing is exactly right for the person who finds it, and this is enough to make the whole apparatus worth running. The buying office also handled something that was less glamorous than the market trip, but equally important, which was returns. When a woman brought back a garment, which happened regularly for the full range of reasons that clothing gets returned, wrong size, changed mind, husband did not like it, found something better, the policy on returns was a significant factor in a woman's willingness to shop in the first place. The major department stores of this era had generous return policies by the standards of the time. You could return a garment within a reasonable period for a refund or an exchange, no elaborate justification required, provided the garment was in its original condition. This generosity was calculated. It was not philanthropy. The stores had discovered, through experience, that a generous return policy increased purchasing, because women were more willing to buy things they were uncertain about if they knew they could bring them back. The risk of the purchase was lowered. The rate of return was offset by the increased volume of initial sales. This calculation worked, and the result was a customer relationship built on a degree of trust that served both sides. Dorothy, who had returned 2 blouses in the past year, one because the shade of blue looked different in daylight than in the store, and one because a seam had pulled at the shoulder after a single wearing, had been treated in both cases with the quiet efficiency of a store that did not consider her transaction complete until she was satisfied with it. The seam that pulled had been repaired at no charge and returned to her. The blue blouse had been refunded in full. She had spent in subsequent visits considerably more than the cost of either of those returns, which was roughly the point. Let us leave the buying office and the return desk and the whole administrative apparatus of the thing, because I have taken you through quite a lot of the building now, quite a lot of the day, and I think what remains is simpler and quieter. What remains is the smell. I keep coming back to the smell because it is the thing most strongly evoked by the people who remember these stores, the people who were shopping in them in 1953 or 1957 or 1961, who are now considerably older and who, when asked about the department stores of their childhoods or young adulthoods, almost always begin with the smell before they mention anything else. The smell of the perfume counter. Yes, always mentioned, always first. But the other smells too. The smell of new fabric, the particular smell of the shoe department, which had its own small ecology of leathers and polishes and the shoe boxes themselves, a clean cardboard smell that had something specific in it, something that recalled the inside of a box that had been storing something precious. The smell of the leather goods section, where the handbags were displayed, the smell of good leather being warm in a heated building, the smell of the carpet, which was itself a smell, something slightly industrial underneath the retail presentation. The smell of a carpet that had been walked on thousands of times and that had absorbed decades of the building's life into its pile. The smell of coffee from somewhere near the tier room, drifting down to the floors below. The smell in December of the greenery that the store wound through the displays. The fresh pine smell of the garlands that dressed the banisters and the display ledges and the main floor columns for the Christmas season. Smell does something to memory that no other sense quite replicates. A smell is not a memory exactly. It is more like a key, a thing that opens a door you did not know was there, and on the other side of the door is not an image or a story but a feeling, the felt quality of a particular time and place, the emotional texture of it, the way it felt to be there. The smell of the department store opens a door for the people who knew it, and on the other side of that door is not the 1950s exactly, not a historical period, but a Tuesday morning, a particular coat on a particular rack, the elevator going up, the brass indicator moving. We carry this in us, the felt quality of the places we have been. We carry it even when we cannot articulate it, even when the language for it does not quite exist. The closest we can get sometimes is the smell, and then the smell opens the door, and for a moment we are back in the thing itself, standing in it, before we were thinking about it from a distance, when it was simply the day and the store was simply the store and the coat was something you had not yet decided about, and the afternoon was open ahead of you with all its ordinary possibilities. That is the department store. Not the history of it, not the economics of it, not even the social dynamics of it, though all of those things are real and interesting and worth understanding, but the thing itself, the store as you walked through it on an ordinary Tuesday in the autumn, when there was no special occasion and no particular drama, just the day and its small decisions and the pleasure of a world that had been designed to receive you. Let that be enough. Let that be, in fact, quite a lot, because it was quite a lot. The ordinary pleasure of a life lived among good objects chosen with care, in a world that had been arranged by someone, many someones, working through the night and the early morning, so that when the doors opened at 9 the floor was perfect, and the light was right, and the smell of the perfume counter came to meet you the moment you pushed through the glass. Someone arranged all of this for you. Someone was waiting. The whole great enterprise of the place, with all its invisible labor and its bought-in expertise and its carefully managed atmosphere and its elevator operators and its buyers going to market in August, the whole of it was aimed, ultimately, at this, at the moment when you pushed through the revolving door, and the street noise fell away and the smell of the cosmetics counter met you, and you took a breath, and the day, whatever it had been up to that point, shifted into something else, something easier, something designed, something that, in its own quiet commercial way, asked nothing of you except your presence and your attention and your willingness to look at the beautiful things it had gathered and arranged and lit for your consideration. The things are still out there somewhere, many of them. The green coats, the white dish towels, the soup tureens in their tissue paper. They have passed through decades and through the hands of people who sold them, and people who donated them, and people who found them in estate sales, and recognized in them the particular quality of things made in an era when making things well was still the default assumption of the manufacturer, and the stores are mostly gone, or changed beyond recognition, or reduced to a version of themselves that holds the name but little of the world the name once belonged to. The great downtown flagships, the ones with the bronze frames and the high ceilings and the Tiffany mosaics, some of them still stand in their buildings, though what happens inside the buildings has changed. Some of the buildings are other things now, apartments or offices or hotels, or the kind of retail that is newer and different in its whole relationship to the experience it offers. The revolving door still turns, sometimes, in buildings that used to be stores and have been converted, and occasionally when it turns, there is a moment, a fraction of a moment, when the air on the other side of the door is a particular temperature that catches you slightly off guard, and the light inside the building is softer than the light outside, and you take a breath before you understand why, before you can quite place the feeling. You are not in the store. You know you are not in the store, but something in the air remembered it for you briefly before the moment passed, before the door revolved you through and the ordinary world resumed its ordinary claim. That is the department store of 1953. That is where we have been tonight, not in the history books, in the thing itself, in the smell of it, in the carpet of it, in the coat on the rack and the doll in the box and the soup tureen and its tissue and the flannel nightgown in the drawer, and the elevator going up, the brass indicator moving through its arc from 1 to 2 to 3, the operator's voice warm and regular, announcing each floor with the same care, as if each floor were a destination worth arriving at. They all were, the floors of the department store, each one its own world. You arrived at each one, and the world was there, complete, waiting. Sleep now. Sleep with the smell of it still in the air if you can, with the weight of the shopping bag still in your hand if you can, with the October light on the store windows, amber and clear, the way the light was that morning when the day was new and the city had that particular autumn clarity, and the store's bronze frames caught the light and sent it back. The elevator rests, the needle rests, the coat hangs in the dark wardrobe, the night is quiet, all the ordinary beautiful objects of an ordinary life, in their places, perfectly still. Sleep well.